Hello, everybody. My name is Elijah Otto. I'm the curator here at the USS KIDD Veterans Museum. And today we're going to be doing one of our USS KIDD keynotes. Okay. Established in February of 2014, USS Keynotes is a lecture series designed to give the community a range of educational opportunities on a variety of topics related not only to history, but also to veteran support issues. Today's topic we're going to talk about is going to be our Kamikaze attack on April 11th, 1945. That happened against the USS Kidd off of her station at Okinawa, Japan. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim Nesmith, our ship superintendent.
Thanks, Elijah.
Why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit about your background and what you do for the Kidd?
Well, my background, my family comes from Edinburgh, Scotland in 16. Oh, wait, not that
I
late.
don't think that far. No,
Not
I
that
don't think
far
so.
back. Okay. For me personally, I'm from the Alexandria, Louisiana area. Went to Louisiana State University. Go Tigers! I see that flag in the background there. And
Yeah.
graduated in social studies education to be a history teacher. And started working here at the Kidd while I got some of my certification tests out of the way, and ended up never leaving. And 27 or so years later, here I am.
All right. That's just a pretty unusual path. You found a place to stay, and you're like, hey, pretty good place.
Hey, I like it. It's been good to me. And having said that, now they'll probably meet me at the door on the way out and take my keys and send me back.
No, it's the institutional memory. That's what it is. So, all right. Well, for our viewers that don't have too much knowledge about what a kamikaze is and what our topic is today, we're actually be talking about uh, a series of Japanese tactics that are running toward the end of the war. And kamikazes themselves are, in effect, a suicide dive bomber. Um, Toward the end of the war, when we are approaching from the South Pacific up through the Solomons, getting ready for the invasion of the Philippines, the Japanese high command basically comes up with a structure that the Philippine Islands are going to be the decisive battle. This is going to be their moment, their engagement that's going to decide everything. And at first, it does not go well. The Battle of the Philippine Sea with the Marianas Turkey Shoot, as it was coined in June of 44, pretty much wipes out the Japanese naval air power for good. And so Japanese are constantly looking for a way to stem this tide that is increasing with Allied pressure into the Philippines. And so what they end up developing in about October of 44 is this kamikaze program. They don't quite call it a kamikaze program. For them, it's a floating chrysanthemum program in their view. But they start training pilots, they start activating people to get ready for this. And what ends up happening is they go through this program and they start being able to launch planes and start hitting Allied targets, preferably carriers, bigger ships. But USS Kidd is involved in this in her action off Okinawa, where after these waves of Philippine attacks, we go off to Okinawa and the really begin in earnest with these attacks. So why don't we go ahead and start with a little bit of background of why we're even at Okinawa? What's him? Is there a way we can talk about that?
Sure. What we have is the kid has been serving through the Pacific since September of 43, and has gone through most of the major battles of late 43, early 44. By the time November, no, I'm sorry, not November, December of 44 comes along, she's been in service for over a year and really hasn't had but one overhaul, just a couple of days in Pearl Harbor. So she's getting some wear and tear on her. And so she and the rest of the members of Desron 48, that's Destroyer Squadron 48, the Abbott, Black, Bullard, Chauncey, Urban, Hale, Stimble, and Walker, along with Kidd, all head back to the States, to San Francisco. And Kidd goes into Mare Island Shipyard and undergoes a big refit, lots of revisions of weaponry, upgrades. The crew goes home. Half of them go home for the month of December. The other half go home for January. And when they come out after some refresher training, they are headed for Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to Ulithi Atoll to prepare, join the fleet and prepare for the invasion of Okinawa, Operation Iceberg.
Okay. And Ulithi, is that a sort of stopping ground for naval planning? Does everybody stop there and then that's when they get ready? Do they gather the fleet at Ulithi and then head out?
They did. Ulithi, for those that aren't familiar with it, is basically an atoll out in the middle of the Pacific, and an atoll is the remnants of an underwater volcano that have gradually just eroded away. And so you have a few small islands surrounding what used to be the crater of the volcano. And so, of course, the crater is going to be massively deep, usually. And the little islands ringing the crater, which now would be a lagoon because it's flooded, would be the edges of that crater. Ulithi was found to have exceptionally deep waters. The entire fleet could fit in there all at once, and it's miles and miles across. Hundreds of ships could fit into it. So it was the perfect forward base for moving forward to the northern islands, getting closer to Japan, islands like Tinian and Saipan and Okinawa. So that's the frontline base for them. So Okinawa is the last stopping point before you start that invasion of Japan. So they needed to have an air base relatively close. That way they're not depending on their longer legged aircraft and depending on the carriers, because of course you have a submarine threat. So Okinawa is the linchpin to taking the Japanese home island, starting from there and going to Kyushu and moving northward.
Gotcha. All right. And then what is Kidd's role at Okinawa? What does Desron 48 do at Okinawa? What do we, where are we at Okinawa? What are we doing? What's our purpose? What's our role?
Well, you mentioned March 1st earlier. March 1st was when they hit the beaches. As the fleet is surrounding
April 1st.
April 1st?
April
Okay.
1st. Yeah.
As they're hitting the beaches, the destroyers are doing exactly what they've been doing throughout the war. They're protecting the carriers, they're protecting the heavy ships as they're going in close to do shore bombardment. They're going in even closer and doing shore bombardment on their own. And then as the invasion is developing, you begin seeing aircraft coming down from Japan to attack the fleet. So it's a little too close for comfort. What naval intelligence finally came up with was we're going to establish a perimeter around Okinawa, around the circumference of Okinawa, and equidistant on these points, we're going to set up picket stations. And at these picket stations, we're going to put ships so that our radar coverage will be farther out. We'll be able to see them launch from the home islands, from Kyushu, the southernmost islands, and we'll be able to radio back to the main fleet, have the carriers launch their aircraft, combat air patrols, and come forward and meet these invading Japanese planes and hopefully shoot them down. And if the timing is right, then they'll be engaging them above the areas where the destroyers are. So you've got that added gunfire in there to stop them. And then if they don't stop them, then they get into aerial combat. So it was a good plan. Of
Mhm.
course, what are you going to use to be on those picket stations? You don't want to waste a battleship or a cruiser on that. It takes years to build those ships. So what are you going to do? You're going to do exactly what for the ships, what John Wayne, termed in his movie, they were expendable.
Uh-huh.
Destroyers are expendable. They're churning them out 4 months. One kid was constructed from October of 42 through February of 43 and then fitted out a couple of months later. So in a grand total of 4 months, you've got a hull floating and with major weaponry on it. And then you're just spending a couple of months, putting super secret technology like radar on there
Uh-huh.
and all the fine tuning. So in 6 months, you've got a destroyer ready to operate. Battleships, carriers, cruisers, they're all taking years to build.
Mhm.
So they've got hundreds of destroyers coming off the ways out of the shipyards. So they sprinkled destroyer squad or destroyer divisions, 4 ships usually, on these picket stations, and they trade them off and on. So they go from protecting the carriers periodically, and then they'll rotate out on the picket line, and then they'll go back and they'll do the other jobs that the destroyers are doing: shore bombardment, picket stations. Oh, not picket
Mhm.
station. I'm sorry. Uh, Guarding the carriers, the,
Yeah.
the heavy ships, and they'll just rotate in and out.
So in effect, what they are doing, it sounds like, is that they're going to go around the island, which isn't very big.
No,
I forget the exact diameters, but it's only a couple miles long, and it's not even a mile wide at some points. Um, and so what they're doing is they have all these destroyers. We have a plethora of them, and as you stated, it sounds like they don't really have a full tactic of how to deal with these kamikazes.
no.
So we're just going to use what's our disposal. We have a bunch of destroyers. Okay, what can we do with these destroyers? And we're just putting them in a big ring around the island, in effect.
Basically, yeah. You just
Mhm.
need to know when they're coming. And they don't really have a full-fledged tactic of this will stop every single one of them. There's just no way.
Mhm.
The I forget who said it, but there's a saying about suicide tactics. There's no way to stop one person that's dedicated to exchanging their life for the lives of others.
Mhm.
Um, you just need to see them coming early enough, and hopefully you can stop them. But if you just don't know, then they're gonna hit you, and there's no way you could have stopped them.
Yeah.
So
So in
having the early
effect,
warning
it's
system is the best way they could do it.
that's what I was going to say. It sounds like it's just just a big early warning system to say, hey, we have these planes coming in at this time, this direction. This what we got. And then hopefully our air power can take care of it.
Right.
So did any other type of ships do picket duty, or is that really just a destroyer job? Did we like put a air power around these ships, or is it just the destroyers that are out there?
You did have combat air patrols, so planes are going out, to
Mhm.
the extent that they can and still safely return with fuel capacities. But you had those. You had several instances of Fletcher destroyers, like the Kid, being hit and sunk. You had smaller ships like LSTs, LCIs that weren't involved in troop movements at the time. In the area. So I would say they probably sprinkled some of the smaller ships, again, more expendable ships that they could
Uh-huh.
replace easily, just to cover more gaps in the radar. But the destroyers took the brunt of the fury of the kamikazes without a doubt.
Gotcha.
And just
Gotcha.
I'll say destroyers, destroyer type vessels. So you have main destroyers like Kidd and Black,
Mhm.
Chauncey, Bullard. You've got destroyer escorts that are also filling that role. Some of the destroyers old destroyers were converted to destroyer minesweepers.
Mhm.
And some of them were converted to troop carriers, APDs. So you had some of those out there as well.
Gotcha. All right. Well, so now we know what Kid's doing at Okinawa. We know why the U.S. Navy itself is at Okinawa. So let's go ahead and get into the meat of it. The April 11th is the date of the attack. Why don't you start us off with a chronology and walk us through a step by step of the attack itself?
Okay. Well, April 11th started out that day with, as seemed to be the case with a lot of days on picket duty, with an attack right off the bat at dawn. They were attacked at dawn, and these, when I say they, I mean Des Dive 96, half of Des Run 48. So that division was Kidd, Black, Bullard, and Chauncey. And they're sailing 90 miles east of Okinawa. And I forget the number of the picket station. I always forget that number.
It's radio. I think it's picket station number 1.
Okay. So they're on picket station 1. They're sailing along, and they've been attacked at dawn. They get a second attack at mid-morning, and they get a third attack at noon. And between them and the combat air patrol, they were able to stop all those attacks cold. Nobody got through. It's now 1:55 in the afternoon, Okinawa time, and they're still in a box formation. Kidd is at the lower left-hand corner of the formation. Black is directly opposite of her. Bullard is forward on the right-hand corner, forward. And then Chauncey is directly in front of Kidd, same distance. And as they're going along, they make contact with a plane coming in from the northwest, the port side of the forward of the squadron. And it's angling across the front of the squadron, coming across Chauncey and headed toward Bullard. It's not directly across Chauncey, but forward of Chauncey, crossing in front toward Bullard. Kidd and Chauncey turned their guns to take the plane under fire. Chauncey radioed that, I've got the ball, I've got it. And they proceed to track it, which was fortunate because Kidd, using the slew sight on the Mark 37 gun director. If you're not familiar with that, the gun director is the big box with kind of a curved radar sitting on top of it, on top of the bridge right forward of the mast on the Kidd. And there's a slew sight on it that lets the gun director, the person in charge of that director, turn it, rotate it very quickly. And when you use that a lot, as they had all day long, it tends to heat up. And there's two little anodes is not the right term, contacts, silver contacts in the machinery running the movement of the director. And when they heat up, they have a tendency to melt. And these two silver contacts right at this particular moment in time melt. And when they did, the slag flows together and makes contact. So you now have just a solid arc, which makes a continuous circuit. And when that happens, the gun director will run away in train, in movement, in rotation, in the last direction that it was moving when that continuous circuit started. When that happens, they were rotating to the port to get this gun in their sight, this plane in their sight. And the gun director takes off and it continues around until it hits the stoppers for the movement, facing almost directly at the mast, on the just port of the mast.
Oh, wow.
This takes all the 5-inch guns with it. So all 5-inch guns now are out of position. So it's fortunate Chauncey was on the ball when they called it, that they had it. And Bill Gaff, one of our signalmen, Bill was the memory of the Kidd. I heard several people call him that. You would go to a reunion, you have 3 or 4 guys sitting in the lobby of the hotel, and one of them's like, you remember this time that we did blah, blah, blah? And guy number 2 would be like, no, you got it all wrong. Blah, 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 blah. We did this. And guy number 3 is like, you're both insane. It was blah, 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 blah. And then somebody looks up and they see Gaff walking across the room. They're like, hey, Gaff, come here. And he walks over and they're like, you remember this? We're talking about this, and we all got different stories. This, we were here and we were doing this, blah, blah, blah. And he says, blah, blah, blah. And he says, blah, blah, blah. And Gaff looks at him, and he was great. His facial expressions were awesome. And he looks at him, he's like, you're all nuts. This is what happened. Boom, 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 boom. And to a single one of them, everyone would go, oh, yeah, okay. And Bill was just,
he was the oral history of the Kidd.
He was the memory of the World War II crew. He really was. And he was sharp. He's in his 70s and 80s, and he's sharp. And he just, it never left his head. It was vivid. And he tells this great story about the Chauncey and this particular plane. He said, normally you watch the 5-inch guns operate. And he said they had a jerky movement, you know, because they're moving side to side and they're elevating at the same time. Two different guys handling it. And if the gun director is handling it, then you've still got two different guys handling it, but they're controlling it from up top in the remote director. And he said they would turn and stop and go back and turn, you know, and just kind of keep trying to line up. And then the barrel is going up, nope, come down a little bit, up, no, you know, and they would fire. And he said you'd knock a wing off or you'd knock the tail off, you'd blow up the front end of it. He said normally it's just coming apart in pieces, all, you know, wreckage going all over the place. He said in this instance, when Chauncey, and of course he's a signalman, so he's up on the bridge. He's got a wide, unobstructed view. And he said Chauncey took the plane under its guns. It's turning smoothly. It's elevating smoothly. There's no jerkiness. Bam, it shoots. And he said it center punched that plane, and it's just this big fireball. There's no big pieces of wreckage, you know, little pieces of wreckage and everything. No big chunks of it flowing off. He said, I wish, this is in the 90s when he's telling the story. He said, I wish you could take this new computer stuff and jack right into my brain and you could see what I saw, because that was the most perfect image of gunnery that I've ever witnessed. So obviously from that story, Chauncey took out that plane. It never got close to Bullard. While all of this is going on the that's going port forward. While that's going on, the gun director now is being taken out of automatic control, taken off that compromised system, and it's being put into manual control, which means there's, just like the 5-inch guns, there's a pointer for elevation, there's a trainer for rotational movement, and then there's 7 guys in there. So the other guys, until they get on target, they're not doing anything. They're waiting. And Gail Paxton was the operator, one of the site guys in the director. And he tells the story of them moving it around, and they're cranking it by hand. Now this thing weighs 25 tons, and it's a bicycle type.
That's lightweight. That's light work, I hear.
Yes, I know, right? You know, that builds the pecs, the shoulders, biceps, triceps, all of that stuff. KIDD is the perfect exercise machine.
Exactly.
Old folks used to go walk the malls, and you don't have malls anymore. So we really need to sell a ticket for people to come get their exercise. We can be a gym.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, we can't be a gym. But anyway,
no.
Gail tells the story of them cranking the gun around. And of course, imagine trying to do this with the ship heaving side to side, port to starboard, forward and aft, moving through the sea. Bryce Logan is also in fire control. There's a railing underneath on the bridge level, right behind the pilot house, right behind where they're steering the ship. And there's a circular railing around the stem that sticks up through the decks, and it comes into the bottom of the gun director. It's the pedestal basically that it's rotating on, and all the wiring and everything going through it. And he's balancing on this little pipe rail that runs the circumference of it, and he's standing on there, reaching up, repairing those contacts, trying to get it back online on automatic. And this is all going on, and while this is happening, over on starboard side, the lookouts spot 2 planes dogfighting outboard of the black from KIDD's position. So on black starboard side.
For our land lovers out there, starboard side is the right side, port side is the left side.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
I apologize, and then to our viewers. I get too deep into the terminology. I get worked up, you know.
That's all right. Well, speaking of terminology, what exactly is a dogfight for those that don't quite know or have never seen Top Gun before?
It has nothing to do with Michael Vick. I've had 3rd graders. You know, do you guys know what a dogfight is? Michael Vick? No, not well. Yes, but no, not not the one we want to talk about. Yeah. A dogfight is essentially 2 aircraft or more attempting to shoot each other down. So for kids today and young adults, teenagers, I remind them of Star Wars. and X-Wings versus TIE fighters trying to shoot each other down. So if you're not familiar with that, then go watch a great movie called Star Wars, and you'll get a
It's
visual.
pretty good.
And actually, that was based off of old footage. The first one, of
Mhm.
1977, was based off of old movie footage of World War II, where they had dogfights. And some of the Death Star scenes with the X-Wings and TIE fighters are real for real, scene for scene, for some of those dogfights, which was
Oh
really
wow,
impressive. Yeah.
I never knew that.
You go back and watch on Disney Plus some of the ILM anniversary stuff, and they'll show
Uh-huh.
the original footage side by side with the Star Wars footage. It's great. I'm a nerd, I admit it. So yeah, a dogfight is basically two planes trying to shoot each other down.
Mhm. Gotcha.
So yeah, they're sighting this dogfight outboard of black, and it's important to remember the ranges and the gunnery that these destroyers have. The Fletchers, all four of these, by the way, are Fletcher destroyers, Fletcher class destroyers.
Mhm.
The 5-inch guns have a range of approximately 10 miles at a 45-degree angle. And they can knock aircraft down. It's a multi-purpose gun. They can fire at aircraft, they can fire at shore targets for shore bombardment.
Mhm.
They can go ship to ship. And then they can knock down these airplanes. So they're seeing these airplanes, they can take them under fire, but they held off because the planes are juking and diving and contorting and spinning so much, they're not really able to make out any markings, definitive markings on them. Obviously, one of them's a Japanese plane, but which one, they're not sure. So it could have been a Brit, could have been an Aussie, could have been American.
Mhm.
So they held their fire, and the planes continued dogfighting. They can actually see tracer fire coming out, which tracers, you just reminded me I need to explain some of my terminology. Tracers, every 3 or 4 bullets in some of these guns, they're coated with phosphorus. They glow when they come out. That way, the pilots, or in case of gunners on ships, the gunners can trace their line of fire and see how close they are to their target and adjust
Mhm.
accordingly. So they're seeing tracer fire going. They know it's a real dogfight, and as the planes get closer, you're getting itchy trigger fingers, and they're well within the range of the secondary battery now, the 40 millimeters, and they get close to the 20 millimeters, the last ditch defense of the destroyers.
Mhm.
Black is getting nervous, and the gunners are getting nervous. And one of the planes now, as the planes are almost on top of them, one of the planes dives straight down at the bow of black, and the other one kind of curves off to the side, like he's almost like he's clearing a field of fire. So
Mhm.
the logical assumption is the one diving at you is the one you need to shoot down. A friend wouldn't do that.
I would think that as well.
Yeah, if you come diving at me, I'm going to smack you, So
Yeah.
Uh, and so they take this plane under fire, and they're hitting him, and they splash him. He crashes in the waters off of the bow of the black, doesn't hit him. But as soon as they open fire on that first plane, the second plane curved back in and is attacking the rear of the black. And the gunners see this, and they realize this was a trick. It was two planes pretending to fight and
Mhm.
shooting and purposely missing each other to get close to the destroyers and have a fighting chance to actually hit the ship instead of being shot down 10 miles, 9 miles, 10, 7 miles away.
Yeah.
So, hey, smart tactic. The
Yeah.
Japanese were not stupid people. They knew how to get in close if they could achieve it.
Yeah, it's all sort of a dance, a trickery, just to get them within, like you say, like these 10-mile barrier for the 5-inch, 7-mile barrier for the 40, and then your last ditch effort, you're already there.
Right.
With this sort of ruse that they did, the sort of trickery that they did to get on inside within that barrier.
Right. It's a genius tactic.
Yeah.
But George Moorer was in charge of the 20 millimeters on the fantail of the black. And he recounted seeing them come in, and he receives the order from his gunnery officer, open fire. And
Mhm.
he takes them under fire with his 20s. The 40s on the ship are opening fire to the starboard side, aft. And he said he had us dead to rights. We hit him in the wing. He's burning, but he got through. He should have crashed the ship. But at the last minute, he pulls up and he leapfrogs over Black and
Mhm.
then comes back down and puts himself between Black and Kidd. So now he's in a Crossfire. And you and I both know you went to not VMI,
Not
to the
VMI.
Citadel, not
Absolutely
VMI,
not.
the Citadel.
Yes. A better
And
school.
a Crossfire is a bad place to be, right? You
Yes.
can't defend yourself behind you. But in this instance, it worked for him because Fletcher class destroyers only had a 3/8 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch thick steel. Well, you can't see it. 3/8 of an inch thick steel, right?
Yeah.
So it's not even a full inch, not even a half an inch. It's
Yeah.
about like this. So just
What I always
a
say
little
is
bit.
you take out your thumb and you look across your thumb,
Uh-huh.
the steel is less than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Paper
So
thin.
anything can go through it. It really
Paper
can.
thin. Yeah.
Yeah.
So putting himself between these two thin-hulled ships makes them not want to use their primary weaponry, the 5-inch guns, because you'll hole one of those ships in a heartbeat. In fact, North Carolina, battleship North Carolina, holed Kidd in September of 43 by accident. And it went through the at the waterline through the mess deck from starboard to port. And so she had two geysers just flooding into the mess deck, and that's a whole other story. And
Yeah.
any guys from North Carolina, we want more cake and ice cream for that.
Exactly.
Read our oral histories on USSKIDD.com. You'll not understand that. So no firing of the 5-inch guns. He's leaving Black behind. They're turning their port side guns to take him under fire, the 40s and the 20s, to take him under fire as he's leaving. Kidd's batteries open up and he's catching it from both ends. He's burning in one wing. This, if you're flying and you've got a wing disintegrating under you, that's not a good thing. But by this point, the planes are heavier than they were at the beginning of the war, better armored, self-sealing fuel tanks. The 20 millimeters aren't going to really do much to the plane. They won't blow it to pieces like the 5-inch guns will. The 40s will knock pieces off of it, disintegrate it over time, just peck away at it and shatter it. But they did a few, when the Kidd came to Baton Rouge, they did a few calculations at one point because there was some question of whether or not Kidd could have gotten out of the way. And
Yeah.
Captain Harry G. Moore, captain, he was a commander. He was captain of the ship. Commander Moore had ordered a hard turn to port the minute the plane topped Black. And what that does, instead of having the Kidd and the plane can come in and have this big long target, if he can get the ship turned, he's got a narrow target now. It lessens the number of guns firing, but it makes a harder target for him to hit.
Okay. So it's removing your broadside, your
Correct.
big silhouette, and then
Yes.
making it really, really narrow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
That's the idea behind it. So he ordered hard turn to port, and it's just barely begun. And they did the calculations. This is a zero, an A6M0 that is coming in at them. And the maximum speed for an A60 and the distance between the two ships, which is about approximately 1,500 yards, they had 10 seconds to react. That's it before he actually hit them. So hardly time to do anything. The plane is coming in. Every third or fourth bullet, as I said, are tracers. Let's use the proper verbiage. Are tracers, and he, with a burning wing, is corkscrewing around the incoming fire to avoid the bulk of the fire coming at him. It's not just a neat pilot trick. Spinning's good. No, spinning.
I hear it's a good trick. Yeah,
it's a good trick. Yeah, according to Anakin Skywalker. But anyway, he's using it to avoid the bulk of the fire because that where the tracers are is where most of the fire is. So he's corkscrewing around it, according to crew members on the Kidd that have talked about it over the years. Even so, they're nicking him in the other wing. He catches fire. He's burning in both wings, but he gets through, and he slams into the midsection of the Kidd just above the waterline. And this would be, looking at an image of the Kidd, it would be right underneath the starboard side whaleboat, down the side of the hull, above the black boot top, which is the waterline, in the band of indigo blue. That's part of the Measure 22 camouflage. He punches through that 3/8 inch steel, and he hits the pipes feeding the main feed line going into the forward boiler. And there's 2 boilers in that space. He hit the
Mhm.
forwardmost one. The steam in there is 850 degrees, 600 psi. About 11 men in that compartment. And when that boiler feed ruptures, it's like an explosive decompression. All that superheated steam gets out.
Mhm.
And at 850 degrees, I mean, those guys didn't have a chance. They died like that,
Yeah.
asphyxiated, burned, but not like burned from flames, but
Mhm.
if
A
you
steam burn, a water burn.
a steam
It's
burn, which
not
is
it's not
really,
good.
really horrible.
Yes.
So they died in an instant, and in this instance, that's a blessing. I would
Mhm.
not want to. I've been a burn victim, and it's not pleasant. So for those guys with that sort of burn, completely different from mine, that would have been horrendous. Um, the plane gets tangled up in the wreckage, the boiler and space. The bomb breaks loose and catapults through the rest of the space, hits the shell, hits the hull, and punches through. So that thin hull hurt us on the starboard side where he gained entrance to the ship, but it saved us on the port side because without it, the hull would have contained the bomb and it would have
Mhm.
detonated and it would have broken the ship in half.
Mhm.
They found out later this is a 500-kilogram bomb, so
Gotcha.
massive bomb.
So
Um,
do these suicide planes do they carry these typical armament? Is that the typical armament for a Japanese Zero?
from what
If
I've
it's making his run on somebody?
From what I've studied, this particular design of A6M, this particular design of Zero, was kind of a newer plane, and they were
Mhm.
able to carry the 500 kilograms. Some of them, the earlier ones, would have had something a little bit smaller.
Yeah, because everyone pictures Zeros. At least I picture a Zero. It's fast, it's nimble, it's sleek, it's maneuverable. But here during on these uh sort of missions, it looks like they retrofitted and made like you said, they put a bigger bomb on there, kind of up armored it compared to that. So that's pretty.
Upgrades.
Yeah, I guess
Upgrades.
that just shows a progression of what they've done with this tactic.
It was a good fighter design, and if you've got something good, keep upgrading it. Keep seeing what you can get out of the airframe, and
Mhm.
that's exactly what they did throughout the war.
Gotcha,
Um,
gotcha.
So the bomb has exited the ship, and our very first ship superintendent, Tim Rizzuto, he's up at the USS Slater now as their executive director. At one point during one of the many reunions in the 1980s, 1990s, one of the Chauncey crew members told him he was working on the fantail of the Chauncey, and he's looking aft at Kidd as this is all going on in the plane. He said, "I saw the plane hit, and I saw the bomb come out the other side of the ship, and then there's this big explosion." And talking about it and parsing through it and everything, they came to the realization he didn't see the bomb come out. He saw the engine of the plane punch out the other side of the ship.
Oh
And
wow,
then the bomb went off because the bomb would
Mhm.
have been moving faster than the engine because the engine's bigger and is gonna be, still kinda tumbling
Tumbling
the
around.
propeller and all that, yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, he saw the engine come out of the ship, and then the bomb, which was just ahead of it, detonates, and that's what he saw.
wow.
Um, the blast was just phenomenal, and to rewind just a little bit
Mhm.
to give you an idea of what's happening during the blast, the guys on the ship were trained at this point. 20 millimeters, as I said earlier, are not going to stop this plane. They'll kill the
Yeah.
pilot, but the planes have gotten bigger, heavier, better armored, all of that. Technological upgrades.
Mhm.
The 20 millimeters are at the max capacity for what they can do, and they're going to kill the pilot, but they're not going to peck the plane apart. So the guys on ship were trained, if you're not on a gun shooting a gun, and you're not handing ammunition to a gun, if
Mhm.
your job is something else and you hear those 20s open fire in one direction, you need to run in the opposite direction and get to cover. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what they're doing. The guys that are not handling the weaponry, not handling the ammo, all of a sudden they hear the 20s open fire in one direction, get the cover, and they
Yeah.
run to the port side of the deck house of the Kidd, all the deck houses.
Mhm.
And of course, now we know they never dreamed that the bomb would make a donut hole through the ship, come out the other side, and detonate. They ran
Yeah.
right into the explosion. The shrapnel's coming up. It's hitting these guys and wounding them. So a freak coincidence.
Mhm.
Fortunate for the ship, bad for these guys. And with any explosion like this, you're going to have a shock wave go out, and this shock wave hits the Kidd, and she flexes a little bit, and the deck houses. Kidd was riveted. Most of these Fletcher destroyers were riveted. As they're going back into the shipyards later in the war, the repairs they're getting welded. Welding is
Mhm.
taking over from riveting, but these ships still started out as riveted ships. And with the deck houses under pressure and flexing, the rivets are under pressure and they're popping out and they're hitting the guys like bullets. Several crew members had to have not bullets, I'm sorry, had to have rivets dug out of them
Uh-huh.
from their wounds. Dr. Brooks Garrett from Shreveport, Louisiana, was on board, and his battle station was in the vicinity of the officers' wardroom. And that's where the emergical surgical center was, because at midship, sick bay is far too small to lay anybody out and do surgery on them. They can handle minor injuries, but not meatball surgery. And if you're not familiar with the term meatball surgery, I first heard it with the television show MASH,
Mhm.
where they were in the Korean War following a mobile army surgical hospital. Meatball surgery basically is keep you alive, get you stable, get you to the next better medical facility. And that's
Gotcha.
all Kidd's surgical center could do. And it, like I said, it's the wardroom table. It's where the captain eats his dinner and all the
Mhm.
other officers. They have a big light, surgical light up on the ceiling, some emergency lamps ringing it in case they lose power. And you do surgery right there on the dinner table and have fava beans and a fine Chianti and liver after everything's done.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Old people like me will get that joke.
Mhm.
Um, so Dr. Garrett is out on the outer deck. He's standing around where the starboard whaleboat is. He's got a camera, and the camera is passed from officer to officer every day. Each officer has it. And their job is basically film anything that you see related to the enemy. If you see a ship on the horizon, film it. If you
Yeah.
see a flight of aircraft off in the distance, film it.
Film it.
If you see
Gotcha.
mines in the water, wreckage, anything like that, film it. And that's for naval intelligence. They turn it in. What wreckage of what plane is that? Okay, do we have a record of anybody shooting down the plane? And just figuring out what's going on in the
Yeah.
world around them, which is why History Channel had so much black and white footage when it first started. So
Yeah.
he's got this camera, he's filming, and he's filming the dogfight. He's filming it attacking Black. Here comes the fighter over the top of Black. It's coming for Kidd, and he's got the camera up in front of him. Here's the plane way out here, and it's getting closer, getting closer, getting closer. And at some point, he takes the camera down. And I got to meet Doc Garrett one time before he passed away. It was right after I started working here. And he wasn't feeling good. He still, years later, decades later, he still felt his injuries that he received in this attack. His leg was really hurting him. The interstate system hadn't been finished from Shreveport down to Lafayette, I-49. So he had ridden these bumpy state highways all the way down, and it had jarred him, and he just wasn't feeling good. But I got to spend a few minutes with him. He's very, very generous, very polite, great guy, and good sense of humor. And I asked him, I said, Doc, why did you wait so long to take the camera down? It's just curious to me. You saw it coming over the ship. Why didn't you run at that point? He said, son, have you ever looked through a camera before? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, they're just like your car mirrors. Objects are closer than they appear. He said, I'm thinking it's over here. And when I take the camera down, it's right up on me. So he sees this, he breaks and runs, and he goes to cut across between deck houses over to the port side. The plane hits, the bomb goes through, comes out, detonates, and the ripple effect, the concussion wave, picks him up before he can even get halfway across, throws him all the way back. He hits the breakwater on the starboard side, which is fortunate because if he had been at a different angle, there wouldn't have been anything high up to catch him, and it would have blown him right off the side of the ship. So he was fortunate in his location at that point in time. He hits that, goes down, and he's out of commission. He's not awake, knocked out. Later, his pharmacist mate is going around taking care of everybody. He sees Doc on the deck, and he's like, "Oh, he's dead," and he keeps going.
Yeah.
And Doc wakes up and sits up and looks down at his leg, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, look what happened!" And his femur bone is actually protruding a little bit. He's had rivets come in and shatter his femur,
Yeah.
which is why his leg's hurting, 60 years later. And being a doctor, the first thing, okay, let me check myself out. He's patting himself down, checking for other injuries and everything, and he realizes his depth perception is off. And a rivet had come in at the same time. One, while he's flying through midair, it's like the Matrix, slow motion. These rivets are hitting him and everything. One hits his helmet, ricochets down, creases his eyebrow, and damages his eye. So that's where his depth perception is. His eyesight is completely messed up. So his pharmacist mate passes by again and is like, "Doc, you're alive." And he said, "Give me a needle, thread, and some morphine." It's this little stick pin morphine, just a little capsule of morphine. You pull the plug off, there's a little needle. You jam it into yourself, and it discharges the morphine. So, give me that, go on your way, take care of everybody. Okay. So he jabs himself. He starts sewing himself up, passes out. Wakes up a little while later, pops himself, starts sewing himself up on the leg. Passes out a second time, wakes up, pops himself a third time. This guy's a champ. He's a goat, right?
Yeah.
And he's sewing himself up for the third time, and he passes out. And he wakes up 3 days later. He's on a hospital ship headed home. They've got him all worked up. He's got a big bandage across his eye and everything. And this guy was so well liked by the crew that when the ship finally catches up to him, spoiler alert, the ship survives.
Big spoiler.
Gets back, big spoiler, unless you realize that this is the USS KIDD YouTube channel. But hey, anyway, when they get back to San Francisco, the crew makes a point. Everybody in the crew came to visit him in the hospital there.
That's awesome.
Very, very well loved. Normally, you got guys that just don't like you. There's guys that just don't like me. So for Dr. Garrett to have 329 other sailors make a point to come visit him, he was really well liked.
Yeah.
So your doctor's out of commission.
Yeah.
Your pharmacist mate who helps him doesn't have all the skills that Doc has, but he's trained medically. He's going around taking care of everybody. There's wounded all over the place. The bridge level, where Bill Gath was watching, Bill got wounded. Commander Moore, took shrapnel to the head, the neck, the shoulders, the back, the buttocks, the legs. He's in bad enough condition that as soon as they get him stabilized and come alongside an oiler, they transfer him over so he can get to better medical attention and be moved on to like a larger ship, say a carrier, battleship, something with a bigger surgical area, bigger medical facility. The executive officer, which is down below in Combat Information Center on the main deck level, Lieutenant Burdick Britton, is in CIC, and he's wounded, and he's got shrapnel wounds, his head, shoulders, back. He was around the DRT table, so that probably shielded him a little bit. And there's 11 guys in that compartment, so undoubtedly some of those guys took shrapnel that would have hit him if they weren't between the two. So between all of that, he's not as bad off as Commander Moore was. So he assumes command after Commander Moore transfers off. and he helps get the ship to safety. And eventually, because of his wounds, puts somebody else in charge, gets relieved. It wasn't like you're relieved to command. It was
Yeah.
just like, you need to go get help.
It's following your chain of command, your procedure. There's
Right.
always somebody who's going to be in charge,
Right.
especially on a Navy ship.
There's always somebody in charge, and there's a line of who takes command. If you watch Star Trek, you see this regularly. So I'm all about pop culture because we're familiar with pop culture. So if you can
we're not
draw
just history.
lines,
Yeah, we're all
not
pop
just nerds.
culture.
We're following. We're making it accessible to you, the viewer.
Exactly.
So with what
you always got to relate it in their terms,
Exactly. It means more if it's not a foreign language. It means more if it's something you're familiar with.
Yeah.
So now the XO is gone. So you've lost your captain, you've lost your XO, your doctor's out of commission. A junior grade Lieutenant Dick Kenny, takes over, and it's wonderful. We just connected with his daughter for the first time in a while.
Oh, awesome.
So I'm hoping to learn a lot more about Dick's side of the story.
Mhm.
So Kenny's in charge. He's getting her the rest of the way to that forward base we talked about, Ulithi Atoll. They're slowly retreating. And they're being circled by their sister ships to keep anybody off of them. So who else is what other sort of damage? Before I can go there, let me tell you, CIC, the reason there was so much damage, it's located more on the port side of the deck house, forward deck house, and the sheet metal that is on the sides of the deck houses is paper thin. It makes the hull look like battleship armor, right? And looking at the pictures of the wreckage, you will see that the wall, the bulkhead, the outer bulkhead facing the ocean of CIC just got ripped open, just like you tore paper. You opened a sardine can, it just peeled it back, and you could see straight out. Straight out. Mac Bradley was a radarman. I got to know him for several years. He was a fantastic guy, and very, very willing to talk about everything that went on. Mac was a radarman, and he handled the surface radar in CIC. And when battle stations was sounded for this fourth raid that day, Mac reported in to CIC, to his battle station, and he was senior to a gentleman named Arthur Lee. And Arthur was going to unplug from his position at the DRT, at the Dead Reckoning table. And I'm using terminology again, I'm sorry. And he was going to unplug, and Mac waved him off. And Mac said, "No, stay right there. You're already plugged in. I'll plug in over here." And he turned around facing away from that wall, and he grabbed a headset. It's the old sound-powered phone headsets that fit over your head. And then there's a shield that sits on your chest with a mic that sticks out in front of your mouth. And you plug into that sound-powered phone circuitry system, and you can talk and change channels and talk to anybody anywhere on the ship that's already plugged in. So he's grabbing that to plug in, and the bomb goes off, and Mac gets his back and buttocks, legs all just riddled with shrapnel as well. And he said when he went down, and said the lighting goes out when he kind of stands up, there's kind of smoke and twilight, and he said he looked out and there's just ocean. You can see the members, like the structural members, supporting everything up above them. But said the skin of the bulkhead was gone.
Wow.
And said this is going to be a story that's going to be recurring with different characters. But he said Arthur Lee, who had been in his normal position, was about to unplug. Arthur was slumped over the DRT. He was dead because he was right in that corner, right next to that wall. And said, there, but for the grace of God, would have been Mac. But because they didn't swap out, Arthur was the one that lost his life. Mac survived. And he was very cognizant of that through the rest of his life. He would come back to the Kidd quite often for our field days each year. He talked about losing electricity. And part of that is because the fire room, there's two fire rooms, two engine rooms. The forward fire room was feeding the forward engine room. not just for propulsion for the starboard shaft, but also for the generators that produced electricity for the forward half of the ship.
Mhm.
So when those generators wind down, Al Ianson is in the forward engine room with Chief Charles David Taylor. And he said Chief Taylor was just this iconic figure. His crew lived in constant fear and respect of him. He said if he caught you just kind of sitting around reading a comic book or something,
Uh-huh.
he'd bark at you. Hey, grab a manual, read up on your system. It may save your life and mine one day. Um,
Yeah.
and he referred to them as his boys. The
Mhm.
boys in Chief Taylor's gang will take care of it, Captain. Don't worry about it. And Al said when the plane hit, they could see the bulkhead because they share the forward bulkhead of the forward engine room is the aft bulkhead of the fire room,
Mhm.
and he could see the bulkhead bulge toward them for a second and then pop back into place, and all that explosive decompression.
Yeah.
He said as soon as that happened, everything started browning out and the generator started winding down, kind of
Mhm.
quieting, and said it went completely black. Now, the important thing to remember about the engineering spaces, there's only two ways in and out. And it's both through one's a very, very small scuttle on starboard side, and then a
Mhm.
normal size circular hatch on the port side. But it's a steep ladder, both of them that curve up the side of the ship.
Mhm.
Their first commanding officer, Alan Roby, loved Commander Roby because he had a talker on the bridge with one of those headsets, and he would have this talker repeating what's going on down to the guys in the engine rooms and fire rooms so they knew what was going on.
Mhm.
Because a lot of times they're in the dark, they can't see outside, they can't stick their head out.
Yeah,
So
their battle stations inside the ship.
it's inside the ship and it's around all this high pressure steam, which we see what's happened now. They've
Mhm.
taken a hit to that. So they took comfort in knowing what was going on out there. And when everything powers down and it's pitch black, and they know that they took a hit just in front of them, they're beginning to wonder, should we be going for the ladders?
Mhm.
And said, all of a sudden, you start hearing the deck plates clank, 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 and this big booming voice, Machok, John Machok at the throttle board. Go below, get me some battle lanterns, get this place lit up. And said,
Mhm.
when Chief Taylor barked at you, you moved. It was just a reflex. And
Yeah.
yes, Chief, and off he goes. And you hear the clanking as he's going below to get the battle lanterns. And said the next thing he knew, here the sound is coming toward him, and a big meaty hand landed on his shoulder and said, Ianson, I want you to go do this. Yes, Chief, instant reaction. And then
Yep.
clank, clank, clank. And he's going around the room, around the compartment to every single member of the engine room crew. And he's giving them something to do in the dark. This is phenomenal because it's not one level surface. It's stair stepped in a few places. He's going
Yeah.
down below to where the pumps are, and there's tripping hazards all through there. There's head knockers
Mhm.
all over the place. This man knows his engine room. He can walk it in the dark. Positional
Yeah.
awareness. Ryan Szymanski from USS New Jersey did a video on positional awareness recently. It's fabulous, and this is a perfect example of it.
Mhm.
He's hitting each one of these guys, and they're maneuvering too. They know their engine room. They're maneuvering and doing what he's telling them. He's going around 2 times, 3 times, giving them new jobs as they finish their other ones.
Mhm.
And finally, Machok's got all the lanterns set up. It's twilight in there because these lanterns don't have it's not huge lumens coming out of them like modern spotlights. It's a little lamp. It's dim. It gives you a little bit of light.
Mhm.
And they've got this twilight in there, and slowly everybody's coming to a stop. And they're looking at the chief, like, what next? And the chief is looking around, he's checking everything out. And finally, he turns to Machok and he says, Machok, pick up the sound powered phone, call the bridge, tell them the boys in Chief Taylor's engine room are ready to transfer steam from the aft fire room because you could cross connect the fire rooms.
Mhm.
Fire rooms, one fire room could feed both engine rooms. Normally, aft feeds aft, forward feeds forward. But you can, in the event of an emergency, this was the genius of the Fletcher design and all the ones around it, the
Mhm.
Sumners, the Gearings, they can cross connect and feed from either one. There's always a backup for a backup.
Yep.
And So he tells him, we're ready to transfer steam from the aft fire room. Michalk reaches for the phone, and Ionson tells me, all of a sudden this big voice barrels out, belay that, and said Michalk jumped about 6 feet in the air. Everybody's on edge. They're nervous.
Yeah.
They took a big hit, and then they're scared to death of Chief Taylor, but they respect him. And said Michalk turns and looks for instructions, and said Taylor rephrased, and he said, belay that. Tell him the men in Chief Taylor's compartment, engine room, is ready to take steam from the aft fire room. And he said, Tim, you know that saying, we'd follow that man to hell and back? And I said, yeah. He said, scratch that. We would have stormed the gates of heaven and kicked God off the throne if that man had told us. He said, we gained his respect with that statement. And he said, it meant the world to us. So that's going on in the forward engine room. In the aft fire room, meanwhile, Emilio Giuliani is in charge of the aft fire room. And he felt the ship shiver underneath him when that decompression hit. Now, he's 2 compartments away, but he still felt that impact, saw the bulkheads ripple a little bit. And he knew immediately something's dreadfully wrong. So it didn't do anything to his readings from the forward engine room, because they can all read what each other is doing. But he realized something's wrong in the forward fire room. He gets on the sound-powered phone and tries to call up the forward fire room, and nobody answers, obviously. And at that point, he realized what had happened, and he still got power, because the aft engine room that he's feeding with his steam is generating power from his forward bulkhead aft. So the aft fire room, aft engine room, everything back aft is on that feed. He's still got electricity. They are not dark. And he has his guys start changing settings and everything so that they can transfer steam to both engine rooms instead of just the one. And he started the transfer system, started heating it up. You have to heat this stuff up. If you just have the superheated steam hit the cold pipes, you'll blow a pipe. You'll kill everybody in your compartment, possibly. So he's got a little bit of steam going into this in these minutes afterwards, while everything's going on in the forward engine room. And he's preheating that line. He said it takes 4 or 5 minutes to get it warmed up, and then 4 or 5 minutes can be an eternity in this sort.
That's a long time.
It's a long time. So for it to heat up, he's not really pushing the envelope too much. He gets it heated up, and it's ready to go when he gets the call that we're going to transfer steam to the forward engine room. So Taylor and his gang, Ionson, Michalk, all those guys, in about 4 or 5 minutes time, they're ready to start taking steam. And so they've got it all ready to roll. Over the years, a lot of people have, in the histories, have talked about, and the naval histories, for the people that weren't there and the people that might have been down below decks and everything, the story has come up, oh, she was dead in the water. Well, that wouldn't have been the case, because the aft fire room and aft engine room is still working. So that starboard propeller has slowed to a stop, yes. But the ship, even if everything was completely dead, would have been still going under her own momentum. And just like these super tankers, you have to start stopping miles in advance, because the inertia is going to keep the ship moving. Kidd would have kept moving if everything was dead, but the aft engine room still has a prop going. So she was still steering, and she was still in that turn that they were starting. And there was inertia, and the prop, they're still moving. So when they finally get the starboard prop moving again by splitting the plant and feeding the forward engine room, she's back underway. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. The damage control teams are beginning to roll, but the forward damage control teams have been compromised now, because 5 members of that team, when the attack is going on, when the plane is coming toward the ship, 5 members run from the exposed position that they're in. The forward damage control locker is on the starboard side of the ship. forward corner of the deck house, right behind gun number 5-inch gun number 1, right below 5-inch gun number 2. Here comes this plane angling straight at the ship. They're like, I got to get to cover.
Yeah.
They took the long way around, but they came down aft toward the breakwater. They actually cut in front of Dr. Garrett, and he followed behind them. There's an alcove around the mess deck ladder, kind of a shielded alcove, and they jumped into there. It's not armored when I say shielded, it's just shielded from the weather.
Yeah.
And they jumped into that alcove, and this hatch is closed, this huge hatch. You and I have to open it every time we open the ship in the mornings. It's heavy.
Yeah.
We've got a counterweight on it. They didn't have that counterweight. And they jumped in on top of that hatch, and Dr. Garrett was still crossing when they jumped in there, and the bomb exploded. The shrapnel from that bomb punched right through the thin skin of the deck house and killed those guys. And then the damage control equipment, the oxygen cylinders, the acetylene, all that is sitting there, and they had a secondary explosion. So they caught it from one angle and from another with shrapnel. All 5 of those guys were killed. So that damage control team is kind of out of action. Fortunately, there's redundancies. You have the midships damage control team, and you have the aft damage control team. So damage control starts moving forward, and they're trying to get down into the fire room. The flag bags at some point, which is where all the signal flags up on the bridge level, the signal bridge, the aft of the bridge level, flag bags catch fire at some point. Somebody grabs a fire extinguisher, puts those out. Russell Keith with damage control, I don't know which team he was with, but Russell gets down there after they send somebody over into the hole that the plane punched, just kind of repelled him in. And they finally managed to get one of the hatches open because it had just, the compression of the steam trying to get out had contorted the hatches. And they finally got one of them open after one of them got down below. And Russell Keith is going down with the pumps. He's trying to get the pumps going. And we were fortunate in where the plane hit, because he hit just above the water line. So the water's not pouring straight into the hole. The waves are hitting as she's going along with the rise and fall of the ocean, and they're splashing in. So it's enough that with these pumps are able to keep up. If it had been pouring in, it would have been a different situation. They would have been much more compromised. Ira McDaniel, while Keith is working with the pumps with others, McDaniel is getting the sound-powered phone system repaired between the two, because all this stuff passes along the side of the ship. There's huge wire bundles going through all these compartments, and those sound-powered phone circuits had been damaged. So he's reconnecting, bypassing all of this. They're having to cut off electricity from the fire room to the engine room, so that they don't short anything out when the water is splashing around and hitting stuff. So there's these riser terminals that we have, and they're all through the ship. It's a secondary system, electrical system, and McDaniel is taking and plugging these wires in to the riser terminals, and then basically they're jumper cables, extension cords, and they go around the damaged area out on the main deck or down below decks, wherever it works, to another riser terminal to tie the system together again.
So you can like skip compartments, or you can tie forward and aft, or that sort of deal with these,
Exactly.
these
And the great thing about the riser terminals, this is an ingenious system. I'm amazed by this system, and it's still in use today. People still use them on ships and everywhere else. The riser terminal, you have 3 different connections, because we have 3-phase power on the ship. But one section of 3 is painted red, one section of 3 is painted white, one section of 3 is painted black. The wiring, those exact wires, are also painted black and red and white. And then for some of them, you'll have 3 little dots like Braille, or 2 little dots, or 1 little dot for the different colors. And then you have some of them, they don't have the dots. They'll have like the number engraved in it, 1. So you can run your finger across it and tell the difference between 3 and 2 and 1. And then some of them have notches on the circumference of this circular terminal, and you can, run your finger along the edge. Oh, there's one. Okay, let me plug one in here.
Yeah.
It's for instances like this where there's smoke all over the place. It's hard to see, or it's pitch black like it will be in the fire room, or the forward parts of the ship where they're trying to get juice to. The wires themselves have wrappings around each wire. So you have one set of twine wrappings, or two sets of twine wrappings, or three. It's just ingenious. You could do this in
Yeah.
the dark and connect them and then tighten them down in there. So that's what McDaniel's doing. He's restoring power. He's restoring phone lines. And the steering has a backup to where they've got cable. So that, we're making sure the cable so we can still steer is in good shape. All of the redundancies for the Fletcher class are coming into play here to save Kidd. So the attack has happened, and now you're going through the aftermath and you're retreating from the area. Dr. Garrett gets passed over, the captain gets passed over, all the wounded get passed over. Eventually, the Hale, one of our sister ships in the squadron from the first division, Division 48 instead of Division 96, Hale comes into the area, rendezvous, and transfers a doctor over. And the doctor is beginning to take care of the wounded. And there's quite a few wounded. 55, in fact, were wounded. And then ultimately, final total, 38 were killed. The aft head bathroom on the ship is wide open, and you can put people in there, casualties in there, for triage and determine who needs to see the doctor first, who needs to get surgery, who's not going to survive. We got to operate on him, get him to the wardroom. Jim Tackich was up on the flying bridge, up above Bill Gath, up above the captain where he was at. He's around he's a lookout, so he's around the gun director, which is, off center and out of action at the time the plane hit. Tackich looked around the gun director when he hears the 20s open fire, and he sees the plane coming in, realizes it's going to hit, ducks back on the port side of the director and hits the deck and puts his arms in front of his face. He's laying face down on the deck, his arms between the metal and his face. The plane hits, the bomb goes through, bomb detonates, and shrapnel comes up, punches through the bulkhead of the bridge level, punches through the deck underneath Tackich, and he has it come through his jaw, pass across, and lodge up under his cheekbone.
Oh, wow.
Massive damage. Teeth are just blown out and everything. Massive pain. He said it just burned under there. His nasal cavity's on fire. And it also shattered his forearm where he had his arm under there. He's busted up. He said that one of the officers, they're trying to get him down now to the bridge level, which it's just the bulkhead with little U-rungs coming straight down. And it's right in front of another ladder leading down to the O1 level. So if he slips and falls on that ladder as he's trying to climb down one-armed with his face busted up, he's going to fall down another ladder right behind him. Not really an OSHA, you need to stagger your ladders,
Yeah.
It's the Navy. It was before it. He takes and one of the officers comes up and said he was a tall gentleman, and said he just stands underneath there, and the guys with him lower him onto the officer's shoulders like he's giving him a piggyback ride. And then the officer just slowly goes down to his knees, and they help him off of there. And then they get him to the next ladder, and it's an angled ladder, and with help, somebody below, somebody above, he's able to come down to the O1 level. They get him down to the main deck level, and they walk him back to the aft head. And he walks in from the port side entrance, and said the first thing when we walk through the door is this bank of mirrors above the sinks. And said he walked in and he sees his face and all the blood, and his cheek is kind of off center, his nose is busted up, gushing blood, teeth kind of all jacked up.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Oh my God, I'm ugly." You got to have humor in this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it'll drive you nuts. So they
Mhm.
take him off to the side. The pharmacist mate takes a look at him and everything. He said there's wounded all over the deck and they're being
Mhm.
triaged. And said ultimately his arm was so messed up, they were worried about the jagged bones cutting arteries or veins
Uh-huh.
from the damage. And so they worked up this contraption to where it's this block that goes, a wooden block that just goes around, kind of like the old stocks from medieval times.
Yeah.
Goes around his arm and locks his arm in, and then they put one up on his shoulder around his armpit, and then they, to straighten out his arm and to keep the bones from moving around and everything,
Mhm.
they've got these dowels, these screws, wooden screws, and said they just start tightening all four of them, and it straightens his arm out and keeps it from doing any damage. So he's, his arm is straight no matter what direction he goes.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, he's got shrapnel in his legs too. For whatever reason, they had him kneeling down, kind of sitting back on his heels, propped up
Uh-huh.
against the bulkhead of the where the urinals are there. And he's sitting with his arm out there. That's got to be uncomfortable to begin with whether you've
Yeah.
got a broken arm or not. And I've broken this arm, so I know that's uncomfortable. Um, and he's got all this going on with his face, and he's sitting back on his heels. And if you sit back on your heels after a while, or in any one position, your leg goes numb from the lack of circulation. And
Yeah.
he's sitting here for hours, just excruciating pain, and listening as they're paging people, they're trying to get a list.
Mhm.
Who's still around? Who's not? These people aren't reporting. Hey, report to this position, and listening to it all. They're retreating from the area. He's hearing word through the loudspeakers through the 1MC system of the oiler coming alongside. I think it was Sewanee, and they're transferring wounded over there. And still searching, and eventually, said it eventually stopped, and they're not searching anymore. They realize who's wounded, who's dead, and they're proceeding from there.
Yeah.
So Takich had a rough time. Also in the aft head, Darvin Lee uh, was brought. He was wounded. I'm not sure where Darvin's position was on the ship,
Mhm.
but Lieutenant Bill Barnhouse had been up on the aft stack. And if you look at Kidd today, she's reflecting her August of 45 configuration. So the way she looks is not the way she looked when she took this hit. She still had
Mhm.
a second set of torpedo tubes. There were no quad 40s. It was twin 40s right beside the aft stack. And then there's a platform for the gunnery director for the 40s
Yeah.
right above them on this little platform, kind of a mirror platform to what the searchlight platform is on the forward
Mhm.
stack. And Bill was on that aft stack on the platform. William T. Barnhouse, his full name, goes by Bill. Bill and his best friend, Bob Berwick, they were good friends. And Commander Moore had realized all these destroyers are taking hits at Okinawa. We're
Mhm.
the ones on the front line. We're on the picket line. They're coming for us. We need to be ready. And so Commander Moore, very far-sighted of him, he started swapping his officers into different positions, cross-training them.
Uh-huh.
So Bill was cross-training on gunnery when this attack occurred. Berwick had moved up and was on the bridge where Bill's normal battle station was. Um, Berwick died, just like Lee died instead of Bradley.
Mhm.
Bill talks about the steam coming up, coming out from where the holes were from the sides of the ship and coming out of the funnel of the forward stack. And then it's condensing as it's rising and turning from steam back into water and raining down on the aft portion of the ship, still scalding hot, but no longer
Mhm.
steam, all water. And said he got burned on the head, neck, down his back, and all the guys on the platform with him. And said when the bomb blast went off, it knocked them all to the ground. And he sees this happening from to the ground, to the deck of the platform. And he sees this happening, and then he kind of blacked out. When he came to, everybody was gone from the platform. I guess they assumed he was dead. And the platform, the ladder, access ladder, was mangled. So he's way up in the air on the smokestack. How's he going to get down? And, that smokestack's not too chilly because, you've got heated air coming out of it from the fire room underneath it. There's a battle staff, flag staff coming angular out of the back of the stack. And there's where the U.S. flag, the battle flag, was flying. Bill was able to reach over, kind of scrabble over from the back of the platform onto that flagstaff, and then shinny down the flagstaff to the aft torpedo tubes and get off. At this point, they're basically taking the wounded and trying to take care of them. So he jumped into the fray, helping everybody. He is in the aft head, and Darvin Lee is brought in. And
brought the wounded in here and stretched them out this way on this deck. And with just enough room between them where we could step over them like that. And we brought Darvin Lee in and stretched him out right here. And I gave him a shot of morphine. Each officer carried 5 vials of morphine on his belt. And we put him out here, and I gave him a shot of morphine. The whole time he was just cussing and mad. He was mad. He wasn't crying from being hurt. He was mad at the Japanese. And he had about 50 wounds from shrapnel in him. And we stretched him out here, and after the morphine, I kept putting sulfa powder on his wounds. And he, when I could see that he wasn't going to make it, I picked him up in my arms, and he died.
So we're retreating back to Ulithi at this point. One plane came in during this time. She's being escorted by Black and Bullard and Chauncey up to a point, and then they go back to the picket station. USS McNair, another Fletcher, comes in. Hale has transferred the doctor over. McNair is escorting us further out, and a plane comes in. It's beginning to get dark. Plane comes in to attack, and both destroyers open fire. She doesn't get close enough. She drops a bomb, but it's not close enough to do anything. And she leaves trailing smoke, which the guys were really proud of. They kept her away. As they're going, they're teaming up with other crippled ships that are still underway, but they've been damaged. So you've got some oilers, you've got some LSTs, you got some destroyers that are all moving together and being escorted by some undamaged ships to get to Ulithi, get out of the area. So this is happening all over the place. At the same date, USS Missouri took a kamikaze hit same day as we did. So this is happening all over the fleet, all over the perimeter. It's nighttime. They're collecting the bodies of the dead, and they bury. Tackage talks about hearing them bury over the 1MC, bury their dead at sea. So the majority of them are buried at sea. They find a few more the next day. They do a second burial at sea. And then what ends up happening, they get to Ulithi and they get a shock because they're pulling into port. And remember, they're part of a group, a sub-task force, if you will, that is damaged. And they're all headed to Ulithi for repairs. And they pull into port, and the KIDD crew gets confused because all of the flags are at half-mast. And it's April 12th. And word has come that President Roosevelt has died. FDR is gone. And that may not mean much for yours and my generation, because usually in the past 20 years, we've had 3 presidents, right?
Yeah.
Now 4 presidents. So that's not a huge shock. But for a lot of these guys, they were born in the 1920s or 19 teens. They've known only a handful of presidents, and Roosevelt has been president at this point, 3 terms, 4 years. That's what, 12 years? 4 times 3 is 12. Yeah,
I think so, but I do history. I don't do math.
Yeah. So 12 years. He's entering his 13th year as president. Many of these guys are 17, 18 years old. They really aren't old enough to remember the previous presidents.
Yeah.
So this is a huge morale blow to the crew. Their leader is gone. And he brought them out of the Depression, So they've lost guys. They never took a serious hit until this point. They scraped anchors. They took a little bit of damage. They bumped people, but they never took a serious. Kidd is the only one out of 8 destroyers in Desron 48 that actually had major damage. All the other ships had just minor damage, and most of Chauncey's damage was from us getting too close during unreps, underway replenishments, and scraping their railings with our anchor flukes, which we had to go over and repair them. So the fact that Chauncey sailors still like Kidd is amazing to me. But we were the only ones to take major damage, so we were very lucky. And now they've taken damage, they've lost guys, and their president's gone. So morale's in the gutter. They go into Ulithi for repairs, temporary repairs. This officer comes on board randomly. He's a lieutenant. His name's Fred Bush, and he just got off of the Maddox, off of the line. Maddox is damaged and heading back, and he transferred off. He got orders for a program going on at Pearl Harbor to take XOs, executive officers, seconds in command, and take them off of their destroyers, run them through a quick course, 30-day course maybe, and send them back out as destroyer captains, because they have so many ships coming out now. From the shipyards, the production rate's phenomenal. And so he's headed to Honolulu. He's stopped at Ulithi to get on a plane and get out of there and get to Honolulu. And he knew Admiral Kidd. He served on one of the ships Admiral Kidd was on after he got out of the naval, after Bush got out of the Naval Academy. And he was an upperclassman graduating when Isaac Kidd Jr., Admiral Kidd's only son, started the academy. So he knows the family. And he sees the kid is there and it's damaged, and he stops by just to check on things. Hey, Lieutenant Kenny, how's things going? Can I give any report back? I'll write a letter to the family, let them know. Because they stayed aware of where the kid was. Isaac Jr. is in the Mediterranean at this point, on the Putnam as a gunnery officer, fighting the Germans and the Italians. So Bush stops by, checks on things, gets on his plane, goes off. A couple of weeks later, here comes Bush back. They exited him out of the program faster and said, "You're going to go pick up a damaged destroyer at Ulithi Atoll. Take it back to the States, get it repaired, and be ready. We're going to Japan." And Bush gets his orders and just starts laughing because he's going to take over the kid. So he should have stayed there, right? A lot of mileage under the wings for nothing.
A lot of it, yeah.
He ended up right back where he started. But he comes aboard, and Lieutenant Kenny, happy to be relieved of command, I'm sure. Lieutenant Kenny tells him about, morale is really in the gutter. And I have an idea if you'd like to hear it. And Bush is a good officer. He likes to hear others' input. And Bush says, "Sure. What do you got?" And he said, "Well, sir, we had a pirate up on the smokestack on the forward stack." Yeah. He said, "We had to paint it over. New regs came down, orders came down, get rid of it." He said, "Commander Moore had to make us get rid of it." He said, "A lot of guys were really, really upset at that." And he said, "I think, sir, we're leaving the combat area. There's really no reason why we can't have it up. I think it'd be a real morale builder." And Bush is a good officer. He listens, and he's looking at the crew, and he said, "Sure thing." So one of his first things when he's giving the speech, because there's always a speech when you change command, always. So Kenny hands over command, Bush takes command. He makes a short, sweet speech. And as part of that speech, he says, "We're going to the shipyard for repairs. And when we get there, we're putting the pirate back on the stack. He may leave eventually, but he's going back on the stack for the time being." Guys loved him. They loved him. Then they kind of got a little downer. He's like, "And we're going to have a clean ship," because there was a lot of trash, debris, and everything still from the attack, floating around. The guys are demoralized, And so he's like, "We're going to clean this ship up. When we pull into San Francisco, this ship is going to look good. She'll have a big hole in her, but she'll look good." And so some of them were kind of grumbling about it and everything. But when they pulled into San Francisco, Kidd was clean, and she went into dry dock. And the thing that the crew loved, they got leave. So she's in there. starting first part of May, and she's headed over. She's coming out in June. So for 2 months, they're rotating crew members off to let them get leave to go back home and everything. So they love that part. They fix everything up. They're en route. They do for refresher training. And what happens in this instance when a ship is going in for repairs, half of the crew didn't come back from leave. Half of the crew got reassigned to a new ship. And what they're doing as these ships are coming in for repairs and as new ships are coming off the line, ships that are being repaired, they're taking half of the seasoned crew and they're putting them on these new ships. And then they're taking a boot camp graduating class and they're splitting it up. Half of it goes to the new ship, half of it goes to the repaired ship. And both seasoned halves of the crews on the two ships train up and help get these guys ready for action.
Yeah, and I think that's an ingenious system, because we also do that with our aviation. You go in, you fly X amount of missions, you come back, you tell the new class, this is how we fly, this is how we fight. And then that new class going in has a level of expectation. It's not quite experience, but it's as close as you can get to it. And I think that's a very underrated, untold story about the American experience in World War II.
I agree. I agree. And it's the word that you used earlier, institutional memory. The new guys are benefiting from the institutional memory of the seasoned crew.
Yeah.
And they can learn things from them that they can't learn from the manual.
Yeah, exactly. It's everything from just everyday stuff to running a ship to out there actually fighting to, what do we do in any sort of situation. And it's really underrated because they really do this. And it's a really great system that in the leading up to the war, Nimitz with the Bureau of Navigation, which would have been the personnel department of the Navy, he helps design that system because he has this forethought of we got to get experience, and how do we do that with just this short amount of people coming out of the Great Depression? Navy scaled back, but we still have a bunch of chiefs that are there. We have some officers that are there. How do we redistribute what they've done? And he actually helps invent is not quite, but enroll into this system of getting experienced personnel dispersed throughout all the levels of the Navy. And I think, I think it's underrated, and you can see how the kid is going to benefit from this.
Absolutely, absolutely, and just viewers, stick with us for just a moment more, because I want to bring up a point that not many people seem to know to underscore what Elijah just said. I got the chance to interview a D-Day +1 veteran a couple of years ago. It was a joint effort, KIDD Keynotes and Lunchtime Lanyap with our neighbor down the street, the Capitol Park Museum, for an anniversary of D-Day. And Joe Rockford, who I met in the burn unit at Baton Rouge General during my accident. Joe, in interviewing him, I had to do some research because of the different camps that he went to and what the camp's jobs were en route to Normandy. He came from a little small town in Plaquemine, just down the road from us here in Baton Rouge. Joe went to a camp north of Little Rock, and the sole purpose in my research finding this out, the sole purpose of this camp was to teach people to read and write. The literacy rate in the U.S. was appalling. It was appallingly small. And when they were doing the buildup to World War II, the military quickly realized we're going to be bringing in droves of people, and they've got to be able to read the manuals for how to operate the equipment that we're giving them, whether it's to clean a gun or to fly an aircraft or operate a radio. So it's this system that Nimitz put together just builds right on that of building literacy, building competency, and then getting the specialized training that they need to continue the fight, or even in this case, when Joe's going in to start the fight. So, it's a great system. The forethought and the breadth, not only the breadth, but the depth of the effort for World War II and training these guys is just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So now that we're going back to Japan, but we're prepared. We're going back. The atomic bombs do drop, so good news for us, and that we don't have to actually invade Japan. And sort of the scale that we're looking at in the invasion of Japan, Nimitz and MacArthur are both requesting about 1.1 to 1.3 million men to do 2 D-Days that will make D-Day look like a piece of cake, with Operation Olympic, I think is first.
Yes.
The invasion of the southern island Kyushu, and then Operation Coronet, which is going to be the next one, and the invading Tokyo plane and beelining it to Tokyo.
Right.
But atomic bombs happen. We don't have to. The kid doesn't have to anymore. So what do we do now that we forwarded all this time? How do we remember this attack? What do we do on this anniversary? Are there any sort of things that we do that you can expand upon?
Yeah. Right off the bat, after all this happens, kid's in Hawaii, she was en route to Japan. She turns around, goes back to San Diego, and they put her in mothballs. So in December of 46, she's mothballed. The crew's gone home. She's in the reserve fleet. And this was part of learning from experiences in World War I, because like every war we've ever been in, you downsized. The guys go home, they're not in the military anymore. The equipment gets scrapped or sold. And when World War II started, we don't have enough ships. Whoops. Well, they decided, Nimitz and all the Joint Chiefs of Staff decided at this point, we're going to stick some of these ships away in reserve fleets here and there. Beaumont, Texas, Suisun Bay, California,
Philadelphia is one as well.
James River around Washington, D.C. area in Virginia, multiple places. I've got a picture of landing craft in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and the Calcasieu River. You could spit across the Calcasieu River, but they've got, no offense to Lake Charles, I grew up on the Calcasieu River, north of there, and you can spit across the Calcasieu River up there.
Yeah,
you can spit across the Mississippi River in Minnesota. So hey. But landing craft by the hundreds just lining both banks of the Calcasieu River. It's not a heavily traveled river back then. They didn't have a lot of industry on it like the Mississippi does. So, just enough room for pleasure craft to get through probably, and any servicing craft that these landing craft needed. All those landing craft are gone now. But everybody's gone home. The ship is sitting quietly in San Diego in the reserve fleet. These guys had a really unique bond. A lot of the crew of the Kidd, the original crew that first came on board, the plank owners, were from New England area, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. And they had a tight bond. They were very cliquish. If you weren't from the New England area, you're like, who are you? But a lot of them, a big percentage of the crew was from there. And so on April 11th, 1946, they kind of had their first reunion, and they met at a little church. I want to say it was either in Somerset or Springfield, Massachusetts. It starts with an S. I always get mixed up as to which one it was, but
it's why like 3 counties big anyways. So
yeah. No offense, Massachusetts.
No.
But they met at a little church in Massachusetts, and they held a memorial service for their fallen shipmates, their 38 fallen shipmates, which is nice. It's just a year down the road. They're probably trying to get their lives started again. No doubt some of them are probably suffering from PTSD, and yet they think enough of these 38 guys, we're gonna remember them. That service in that church in Massachusetts continued unabated until around the mid-2000s, when these guys got old enough to where they just couldn't go anymore. Their health is deteriorated. They just can't make it. The ship is brought back in 1951 into service, recommissioned for Korean War. The entire time that the ship was in, I'm hitting my computer, I apologize. The entire, that's
getting into it, man.
I'm excited, man.
Yeah.
From 1951 till when she's finally decommissioned in 1964, in June 64. They hold a memorial service for the guys that died on that ship. the new guys, the Korean era guys, the Cold War era guys, they are very aware that 38 shipmates died on this ship. And they're aware of that partially because not just in the ship's history. When you go aboard ship, you get a packet of information, and here's the ship's history. So they all got that. They're aware of Admiral Kidd's sacrifice at Pearl Harbor. But the other reason that they're aware of this is because when Kidd was tied up at Ulithi Atoll for all those weeks, late April and the first few days of May, she's tied up beside a destroyer tender by the name of Hamel, like the star. And the crew of the Hamel, while helping effect temporary repairs for her to make the voyage back to Pearl Harbor and from there to San Francisco to Hunters Point Naval Shipyard, they cast a brass plaque and engraved the names of all 38 men that died, their names, their ratings, and it's mounted on the ship's quarterdeck when you first walk on board the ship. And it stayed there throughout the rest of her life until she was decommissioned in 1964, and they removed the plaque. When they decommission a ship, they'll pull anything of historical value, and it goes to the Naval Historical Center back in the day, Naval History Heritage Command now. And that plaque stayed there. So that's a way that the crew remembers. And then in 1982, Kidd is saved from the scrapper's torch, and she's brought to Baton Rouge. That plaque comes here, and starting, let's see, she arrived in May of 82, so starting April of 83, there is a regular memorial service for those guys every year to today. We're in 2023 at this point.
I believe 2023. Yeah,
without fail. COVID didn't stop it. We did it. The public wasn't around, but we did it, and we put it on the internet for people to see. We were closed for the filming of the movie Greyhound, and one of the things we did was negotiate with the filmmakers that on April 11th, no matter what you're doing, we have to stop at so-and-so time, and we're going to be shut down for filming for the next hour, hour and a half, whatever it is. And we're going to do this ceremony because from 1946 to today, which that was 2018 when they were filming it, there's never been a break in line, and we're not going to break this tradition. And the filmmakers, I'm just so pleased with them. They were like, absolutely not. Can we attend? And we're like, yes, you can. So if you go on our Facebook page, and I think it's going to go up on our YouTube page sooner or later. But if you go to our Facebook page and look up our Kamikaze live stream, Kamikaze Remembrance live stream from 2018, the viewpoint is from a certain angle facing kind of angular toward Mount 55, facing starboard. And the camera is set up facing that way because to avoid spoilers, because with the internet, everybody picks apart any little detail they see of a movie being made. They didn't see any spoilers about what's going to happen. So all the cast members are sitting, and crew members of the movie are sitting behind the camera, out of camera shot, in their uniforms, their costumes. And we're filming that way. And it was really neat because I didn't know it at the time because I have blinders on when I'm helping conduct the ceremony. I'm focused on what I'm doing, not what's going on around me. And after the ceremony, we had a couple of family members. The filmmakers were nice enough. They showed up. They didn't get the word that we were closed. And the filmmakers were nice, and they said, sure, they can come on board because, you know, there's cables and everything all around for cameras and electrical and all that. And it's a liability. Understandably, you know, they could have turned them away, but they didn't. And so the family members come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh, isn't it so great that he participated? And I'm like, who's he? Tom Hanks. And I'm like, Hanks was here. Did he stick his head around the corner? You know, because one of them had asked, Tom would like to see this. You know, is it okay if he attends? And I'm like, yeah, sure. The camera's going to be facing this way. He can stick his head around the corner. He can sit over there, whatever he wants to do. And, you know, I'm not looking at the camera the whole time, you know, so I'm doing the service, trying to make sure I pronounce the guy's names correctly. And they're like, Tim, he stood right in front of you. And I'm like, what? And so you go back and you look at the footage, go to Facebook, look at the 2018 footage. And when I call out the name, I believe it was Bernard Kostelnik, you see this guy walk up. He's got his sunglasses on. He's got the white shirt, like button-up shirt and black
Mhm.
tie or blue tie that he would have with his costume, but he just doesn't have the jacket and the hat on. And he
Yeah.
walks up, he takes a carnation, he walks, as we call his name out, his age, his hometown, and we ring the bell for him, and he lays a flower in the water for one of our fallen crew members. And I just, my respect for him just went through the roof at that point. I liked him before
Yeah.
that, but for him to participate like that really meant a lot to us and a lot of the family members. Ironically, this video, nobody has ever gone, "That's Tom Hanks," in the comments. I don't think anybody recognized him. So our
Yeah.
Facebook, get ready. The people are probably going to just start going nuts. The views for that video is probably going to go off. But that's how we've honored these guys since then.
Yeah.
One of our crew members, the original plaque from the Hamel was engraved. So for how many years? 64 to 51. That's what, 14 years?
I think so.
Is that right? Yeah, something like, again,
13.
math, not history.
Not a strong suit.
Not a strong suit. Richard Ammon worked in the aft fire room where this thing was mounted, at the alcove on the deck house for the entrance to the aft fire room. And he was there from 59 to 63, 64, boiler tender. And he said one of his jobs was to polish his chief, polish that plaque, make it shine. And so he's polishing it every day for those 4 or 5 years that he's on the KIDD in the 60s in the Cold War. And all the guys before him have been polishing this. So the engraving is gradually disappearing and everything. So one of the crew members, I want to say it was Norman Oresco and his family, got the list of names, and they had a new plaque made once the museum got here and the ship got here. And it's raised lettering instead of engraving, so it'll last longer. And that plaque is mounted now at the old quarterdeck on the ship, not where we have the gangway now, but at the old quarterdeck. And the engraved plaque has been moved into climate control here in the museum. And not far away from it is the last piece of the puzzle for how we remember these guys. Ammon, who I mentioned, crew member from the 60s, he came when the ship first got here and visited. And he said, I polished that plaque every day for all those years. He said, and I see that plaque and I know those names right off the bat, all 38 names. And then I went home. He was living and working in Winter Park, Florida. And he said, Tim, I couldn't remember a single name. And that bothered me. He said, people should be able to remember those names and remember those guys. And around the same time, and he's telling me this years after the fact. I didn't know him back when the ship first opened. I was still in grade school, middle school. So he's telling me this after the fact. But around the same time that happened, a buddy of his up in Pennsylvania started this project. He had a veterans from his county in Pennsylvania. He started a project where he was going to collect the photographs of every veteran of every guy who was killed in action from that county, and everything from the Spanish-American War all the way forward to the Vietnam era, and maybe the Gulf War too, maybe the Desert Storm. These are several hundred guys from this little small county, and he accomplished it. And he's telling Richard about the project. He's all excited about it, and Richard's like, "How did you go about doing it?" And he tells him, the way that he collected all these photos. And Richard's like, if this guy could collect several hundred, surely I can find 38. World War II, Spanish-American War, World War I, that's tough. World War II is not that far away. So he starts this project with the blessing of the museum. He's like, I want to do this. Is this okay with you guys? And they're like, yeah. How can we support you? And so he's like, just help me out, when I call for it. So he started writing the National Archives, the Military Records Center. And keep in mind, this is before the internet really takes off. So he's doing this the hard way, writing letters and sending it off. And back in the day, they would get their written request. You had to do it in triplicate. And the very first request in triplicate, if you don't hear from them in 6 months, they're telling the people writing for this stuff, do it all over again. Make sure you make copies. So He's sending a third request, fifth request
Aye, aye, aye.
for 38 names. And
Yeah.
the way the museum was able to help him was this is all done for education.
Yeah.
Because with the privacy acts beginning to come into play in the 90s and into the 2000s, if you weren't related to these guys, there's no way you're going to get this.
Yeah.
And fortunately, the museum doing it for educational purposes gave him his silver bullet to bypass those privacy acts. Because the guys are gone, they're not still living. So the information is not really going to do anybody any good. Nowadays, of course, they'd steal their identity in a heartbeat on the internet. But he's making headway. He's getting pictures and everything. So by 1996, there's a Desron 48 reunion here in Baton Rouge. And Richard shows up, and out of 38 people, he's got 34 already picked out. And he gets here early. The museum works with one of the people, the framers here in town, and they put together this gorgeous golden frame, blue matting, and you've got these little oval pictures of these 38 guys, and you've got photo pending for the 4 that we didn't have. It's got a Purple Heart, all the ship's ribbons, and the ship's picture right there. And the 2 officers that died, Berwick and Gresheiber, are in the center to either side of the picture, and then all the enlisted guys and the chiefs above and below it. And so that is there in the KIDD exhibit room now. And since that time, since 96, these last 4 have been found. Richard used to get the next to last one, Richard used a name finder, which nowadays is commonplace, but it was a revolutionary thing in 1998, 1999. And he used that brand new technology to find Robert Walker. And the next April 11th, Robert's family came, his wife and his son came and dedicated his picture. The last one, Chief Hamilton, we found his picture. He was African-American. Not a lot of pictures of the African-American crew in the photo albums that we've inherited from crew members. And one of our volunteers, Daryl Averett, he would go over eBay and find all sorts of military stuff. He's a military fanatic. He collects stuff. And he found this photo album, and he calls up and he said, I need to come see y'all. Y'all need to make some time in the schedule for me to come in, because I don't know how long this is going to take. It was like, what do you got? I got a photo album from the internet, from eBay, that I bought. I think I found your last crewman. And so he brings it in, we look at it, and it's a row of chiefs all lined up on the bow against the rail. Some of them, squatting down, some of them standing. And one of them is African-American. And Chief Hamilton was the chief steward's mate on the ship. And only African-Americans could have that rating in World War II. And we look at the dates that he served, and the date that this album took place, that this photo took place, is in the range where he was the chief steward. So it's got to be Hamilton. It can't be anybody else. You can recognize other chief petty officers from the crew in there. So it was definitely him. It's not a great photo. You can't see his face that well, but it's better than the 1 or 2 that we had that were closer up, that it's just, he's in shadow. It's a black and white photo. It's hard to tell. This one, you can actually see he had a mustache. So you get a little more detail. So we put that.
Every proper chief should have.
Yeah, every proper chief should have a mustache. So that's the last bit that we had. So yeah, today we still do our April 11th ceremonies. We've got one coming up next week, and we try to make sure we honor these guys.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I like about history in general, is people always ask you how you get into this field and all this sort of stuff. But it's definitely the stories of people. That's the thing, I think, that connects us more than really anything, is what's your story like? What's his story like? What's our story like? And so being through this through this program and stuff, and being with the KIDD, it really ties everything back around, and it gives it a very, very personal touch. Like, we've all seen the footage of the Arizona blowing up, but on the bridge you realize that Admiral Kidd's up there. And then so going through this, and especially with me, I've been around museum ships my whole life and stuff like that, and so going through here and learning about this story for the kid and the crew members and stuff, I think it adds a really, really good personal touch. Because, like I said, we have the original plaque that's in the museum on display, and then we have the new plaque that's right there. And I like pointing that out on my tours and stuff like that. So, but it's amazing. It's all sorts of it's just ingrained stories of our experience as an American. So I think it's awesome.
Well, there's one other part of remembrance that we're beginning to do these days.
Mhm.
One, we lost 38 crew members, but Japan lost an aviator.
Yeah.
In the late 90s, early 2000s, we were contacted by a gentleman, a lawyer from San Diego, and historian, who was working with some of the museums in Japan to try to identify the kamikaze pilots.
Mhm.
And Katsumi Hiragi is his name. And he started digging in, trying to figure out who had hit the kid. And others had, they had identified the pilot that had hit the Missouri that day.
Mhm.
I'm not sure how Mr. Hiragi came to focus on us. I don't think I've ever heard that part of the story, but he worked with our staff and everything, getting bits and pieces. He flew to Baton Rouge. He listened to the recollections of the crew, read the
Uh-huh.
oral histories, looked at the wreckage that we have of the kamikaze plane, determined that it was indeed a zero. Went to the reunions because they were still having reunions at that point of the World War II crew,
Uh-huh.
and talked to some of these guys. And unfortunately, you know, there were still some hard feelings from some of the crew members. They lost friends, they lost comrades. And so some of them weren't really interested in learning more about the guy that killed their friends, in their viewpoint. Others were
Mhm.
like, I really would like to know. I'd like to know more about this guy. He was serving his country too. So it was a balanced, situation.
Yeah.
Others could move on and others couldn't, and that's understandable. Um, he came back to us in 2001 with the identity, with probably like a 95% certainty,
Mhm.
that it was a young man by the name of Shigehisa Yaguchi. And he was an engineer by trade, um, graduated university, went to work in private industry, and then when the war started and things got to the point to where, you know, the Japanese military were being pushed back toward the home islands, he volunteers.
Mhm.
Um, he volunteers for the unit the aviation unit that had come up with this rocket propelled aircraft. And he wanted to take that on. And the first missions of this aircraft failed. And
Mhm.
so the Japanese kind of abandoned it. One of the Fletchers actually got hit by it, and the rocket was so powerful that it just punched straight through the bow of the ship and out the other side. Same way our bomb did for
Oh, wow.
Kidd, but the whole aircraft and the bomb it was carrying went straight through the hull and out the other side and detonated out in the ocean. Uh,
Jeez.
so a little bit too much ump there. He didn't hit in the right place, I guess, but
Yeah.
he may have gone through the engineering spaces like this one did.
Uh-huh.
But when that unit kind of folded and they kind of put it to the side, Yaguchi volunteered for the Kimu squadron down in Kyushu on the southern island, and he's a very skilled pilot. Obviously, from the way he approached Des Dive 96, and then
Yeah.
Black, and then Kid, very skilled pilot. Um, the report that Mr. Hiragi put together read like a CSI report of the just, step by step process of elimination. It's this type of plane. The kid got hit this time. At this time preceding that, this squadron flew out from Kyushu. This squadron flew out from Kyushu, from Kanoya Naval Air Station.
Mhm.
And this squadron went over here. This is the one that hit Missouri. This is the one that hit these ships over here. This is the one. And this one we're not sure where they hit, but, and, you know, he keeps going on, and the process of elimination ended up it being Yaguchi. Yaguchi is theorized to have been what they call a shepherd. And it's an experienced pilot that takes these inexperienced pilots, young men, old men who were not aviators, but they got quick and dirty training, put them in a plane, let's go.
Yeah.
And they would follow him out. He knew how to navigate, and he would get them to where they needed to be. And then he would orbit high above, and through hand signals or radio, whatever his plane might have or not have, he would communicate, you are going to go after that target. And he'd wait, and you are going after that target. You are going after that target. And he'd send them to their targets and then orbit and evaluate the results, fly back and report back in.
Yeah.
And pick up another squadron. And here we go. And so the theory is that dawn raid, that mid-morning raid, that noon raid, that he led those guys there and sees, you know, the failure of those raids, goes back for the fourth raid, and as they're going out, he's just like, screw it, I'll do it myself. And so he sets up the diversion from port side. He sets up the fake dogfight so that he can get in close and he can take out a ship.
Yeah.
So very, very skilled aviator, very good tactician, if you think about it. So yeah, he identified Yaguchi. He approached, and we asked the crew members how they felt about allowing Yaguchi to be recognized as part of the annual ceremony on April 11th aboard the ship. And the very vocal portion of the crew that we're still feeling pretty raw about the attack, you know, all these years later, they were like, absolutely not, absolutely not. And so we had the information on Yaguchi. We've held it all this time, and gradually the number of crew members attending is lessening. And we get to I want to say it's 2017, 2018. Well, it wouldn't be 18, but 2017 or 2019. And Coach Fred King is here, and he's by himself, and no other World War II crew members are ever able to make the trip. And he's getting to the point where he's saying it's getting harder to drive from Florida. And the last time he came, I want to say it was 19. His niece drove him over. And Fred, Coach King, was sitting on the fantail, and I asked him, I said, Coach, I want to ask you a potentially sensitive question. And he said, shoot. And I said, how do you feel about this? And I told him, you know, we knew the identity, and which he already knew. And I said, how do you feel about laying a flower in his memory?
Yeah.
And he looked down. He's very introspective and very quiet, which was his nature. He wasn't a loud person. And he thought about it, and he looked at me. He said, what is your opinion? I said, Coach, I don't have skin in the game. I didn't have friends on the ship. I didn't serve on the ship. I didn't suffer that attack. I said, this is a call that only you can make. And so he thought about it, and he said, it really should be done. That young man deserves to be remembered by his family, by his countrymen. He was doing his job. Old men start wars, young men fight wars. He said he didn't want to be there any more than we did. And he paused for a second, he thought, and he said, but Tim, I just can't bring myself to do it. Those were my friends, and he killed my friends. He said, and it's not right. He said, but he said two things for you. He said, today, after the ceremony's over, when everybody's gone, I want you to lay a flower for that guy because he deserves it. He said, I just can't be there. I can't bring myself to do that. He said, but you should. He said, and the second thing, when it gets to where none of us are around anymore that can come down and visit, he said, put that man in the service for the public. He said, because he deserves to be remembered. So after he left that day, we laid a flower for him. When COVID happened, we laid a flower for Yaguchi. We call his name, we ring the bell, we give his age, which he was 23. Young guys fight wars, like he said. And we've been doing that steadily ever since. That was Coach Coach Fred's last time with us. He passed away the next year. And per his instructions, we've been including Yaguchi in the event ever since. And in the coming months, weeks, one of the things that we're going to be doing in the museum is we're going to be redoing the section talking about the Kamikaze hit on KIDD in our KIDD exhibit room. And we're going to be incorporating Mr. Hiragi's step-by-step CSI, investigation that identified him, because it's really interesting to read how he found him. And we're going to put a little information about Yaguchi and how he came to be there and have his picture up there. So he will be remembered just a few feet away from where the picture frame is, where the 38 crew are remembered. And so all the participants in that attack that were lost will be finally recognized and remembered.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, personally. So
I think so too.
Yeah, I think this should be done. But yeah, other than that, I mean, so that's our Kamikaze keynote. It's an interesting story. It's a fascinating story. It does have some tragedy in it, but it's what it is. It's part of the reason why we're here. It's to remember those people, their stories out there. So, is there any sort of final last thing that you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, it's important to remember that these guys were human beings. I mean, the pictures that Richard collected are great. They put a face to the name, but it's just young guys. One of the great things that came about as a result of this exhibit coming up with the pictures and that Richard's research pulled out was the shipmates started sharing information about the guys. Surviving family members started sharing information about the guys, and we began learning things that make them relatable to you and I and to the general public. People who might not ever have any experience in the military. I have no experience in the military. My family did, but I didn't. So if we have just a few minutes more, I'd like to just give a few of those details, if possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there's so many guys, it's hard to keep it all in my head, but I'm gonna use some crib notes here. So if I look off camera, that's what I'm doing. And hopefully we'll be able to put some pictures up to go along with this. Addison Smith was one of the 3 CPOs that was killed on board. He died on the bridge. He left behind a wife and 1 son. Addison was a Pearl Harbor survivor. He was there when Admiral Kidd died.
Oh, wow.
So serving on Admiral Kidd's ship probably meant a lot to him. He came through the Pearl Harbor attack with no injuries. He went on to serve aboard an oiler, the Neosho, and that was sunk out from under him at the Battle of Coral Sea.
That Coral Sea. I just finished thinking about the
Neosho. 5 months later, he's got a ship. He's in the water. His ship is out from under him. Only a third of the crew survived. They're on a floating gas tank, and he survived. He put 2 more ships into commission, including the new USS Neosho, before he got picked to be on the staff of a flag officer in 2 different postings. And from there, he became KIDD's chief quartermaster.
Oh, wow.
Arthur Lee, who we talked about in CIC, he was the old man of the group. He was 35 years old. And he was originally born Arthur Leibowitz. And back then, of course, we know, and unfortunately still today, there's some people that just don't like Jewish people, and anti-Semitism was pretty rampant in the U.S. in the 30s and moving into the 40s. So that's the theory, is he changed his name from Leibowitz to Lee to avoid some of that difficulty. He worked as a civilian in the New York Stock Exchange, and he left behind a wife and 2 daughters as a result of the attack and his passing. Bill Abernathy was right behind Arthur, and he was 34. And Abernathy was a metallurgist, and I'm still trying to figure out what he did on the ship. Metallurgist is just something I don't know too many people who ever knew a metallurgist in the Navy.
Just that's not the alchemy thing, right?
I know,
Or
right?
trying
So,
to
yeah, Bill being an old guy, there was a young man by the name of Richard Utley that served on the ship, who I had the pleasure of knowing. Richard lied about his age. He's a dirty, stinking liar. He and Harold Lamb both lied about their age. They both came aboard at age 14 in 1943.
It's a bit young.
14 years old.
Yeah.
I was not ready to fight a war when I was 14 years old. Abernathy found out about it, kept his mouth shut, apparently. He adopted him and kind of kept him out of trouble. And Richard said he tells stories that he would go on liberty, on leave, on shore with the other guys, shipmates. And they were a good bit older than him, and said Bill was this big, huge, hulking mass of a guy. And he'd stand at the quarterdeck and he'd just rail at these other guys, wagging the finger. You boys, look out for that kid. If he gets into trouble, you'll answer to me. And they're all like, yeah, whatever, old man, you know. But said they looked out for him because Bill was looking out for him, and they did not want to cross Bill.
Yeah.
He was an amateur photographer, always had a camera around him, which is interesting because cameras weren't really allowed on the ship. One of the interesting things about Bill is that while they were in New York fitting out the ship, he got married to a wife, Marion. And he got married at the same time as the chief engineer, George Gresheiber. In fact, they were married on the same date. I'm hitting the computer again. Sorry.
You are.
Yeah. They got married on the same date at the same time in New York City.
Well, there we go.
They both died on the same ship at the same time.
Wow.
Their widows were both in New York, and Marion was buying groceries at a local store after after all the letters went out, to the families.
Yeah.
And this sort of stuff got published in the papers. That wouldn't happen these days. Not that fast. It would be a few weeks later. But Marion is in the grocery store. She's at the front of the line, and Grace Gresheiber was farther back in line, and she hears the cashier say, Miss Abernathy, I was so sorry to hear about your husband dying on the kid. If there's anything we can do, that sort of condolences. And Grace jumped out of line as she's walking out of the store, and she said, hey, your husband was on the Kid? And she said, yeah, he was killed. The ship was hit recently. And she said, my husband was killed on the Kid. And so they were kind of there for each other, kind of a support system, Gold Star widows, Gold Star wives. And they struck up a friendship. And then, over time, life, they're young, they're in their 20s, and life 30s. And their life just kind of swept them in different directions. And then they remarried, and their second husbands, both of them eventually passed away. And they didn't feel right going to the Kid reunions during that time because, they've remarried, they moved on. But when their second husbands passed away, both of them were like, I'd like to go meet these guys, maybe learn a little bit about Bill, maybe learn a little bit about George from their time on the ship. And so they went to reunions, and they reconnected and recognized each other instantly and became the best of friends again. And in 96, when we put the picture frame up and dedicated, both of them were here. And both of them shared their stories and everything, and it was very sweet as the bus is leaving with all the crew and all the families and everything. Grace walks over to the picture frame and just very quietly kisses and puts a kiss on George's picture. So it's very freaky, both of them paralleling so much and not knowing each other beforehand. Virgil Henson was the oldest of 5 children on a cotton and cattle farm in Texas.
There we go.
He spent his entire leave, Texas, there you go. He spent his entire leave in December 44, January 45, walking around the farmhouse with his youngest brother, who is still a baby, learning to walk. And he's holding his hands up and putting his brother's feet on his boots and walking him around the house, teaching him to walk. Virgil's mother and all of his siblings, His mother was still alive in 96 when they dedicated this exhibit. They came, and his younger brother, of course, didn't remember him. He's younger, and
Yeah.
we were talking with him, and he said, you know, I never knew Virgil. He said, but I think of him every day. We're like, how so? And he said, every step I take is because of him. He taught me how to walk. Oh my God, what a story, right?
Yeah.
Holy crap. I told my wife that story. She started crying. So Lester Hodges was a baker, and his battle station was in the #1 handling room for Mount 51. He wanted to be transferred topside. He wanted to see some action, and he finally got that transfer. And on April 10th, his shipmate Neil Fiscus in the handling room said they all had a discussion about fate, and said Lester's belief, Hodges' belief, was that when it was your time, it's your time. There's nothing you can do to avoid it.
Yeah.
And on April 11th, that was his first day in the damage control team, topside, forward damage control, and all that team was killed. Nobody in handling room #1 was injured. So it was his time. James Olin was a fireman down in the fire room, and he wanted to transfer from fireman first class. He struck a rate as an electrician's mate, and he got put on damage control team forward, and he was killed. So again, if he'd stayed in the fire room, I don't know which fire room he was in, but since he wasn't aft fire, he wasn't in the aft fire room, he was on the damage control team. But nobody has ever said anything about him being in aft fire room. So it's possible he was doomed whichever way he went, because fire room got hit. Richard Hyde joined the Navy. He was constantly being caught by a truancy officer. And his buddy, he was skipping school. If you don't know what truancy is, it's skipping school. He got busted with a friend of his, and the judge basically told him, you're going to jail or you're going in the Navy.
Yeah.
And so they went in the Navy. And while in Navy in Boston, he meets up with Al Ionson in the forward engine room, who I was telling you about. They became good friends. Richard heard that Felix D'Amico, who was one of our 38 killed, was down because it was his first birthday away from home, and his mom made these fabulous chocolate cakes, and just he was depressed. And so Richard baked this huge chocolate cake in the galley and got some of his close friends, and they brought him to the galley, and they had a birthday party for him.
Oh, nice.
And said Al told us, he said that was the best, that they could have done thing for him. He really perked back up, and that was the first of several surprise birthday parties as Richard found stuff out about his shipmates. Richard was also on that damage control team, and he took shelter in that shelter alcove for the mess deck ladder. And the secondary explosion with the bottles killed him. Another person that was on that team was Chief Hamilton, who was the last one we could find the picture of. He was age 33 from Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Now, he had served in the Navy from 1934 to 1940 and got out. Some of the shipmates talk about the actress Lena Horne. Said he used to talk about dancing at night with Lena Horne in the dance clubs in New York City. Unfortunately, I was never able to confirm that. He was a plank owner on the destroyers Anderson, Jeffers, and then Kidd. And he was one of the three CPOs killed that day. He was one of 3 African Americans that was killed that day, and he left behind a wife. Charles Green was one of the other African Americans. He was confined to the steward's quarters that day. He wasn't in trouble. He was sick. He had the mumps on both sides. Just feverish and just really, really in bad shape. And I've only told this story in our adults only Twilight tour, but I'm going to tell it in this one because it's a story that deserves to be told. I had 5 different shipmates when they were visiting on 5 different occasions. None of them knew that the others had told me this story, and yet all 5 of them, their stories matched up from different viewpoints on the ship. And that's the great thing about oral history, is you need to confirm it, because if you, Elijah, hear a story and you tell it to me, and then I tell it to Orrin, and Orrin tells it to Parks, and Parks tells it to Todd, and on around the crew, then eventually, as time passes, we all believe that we saw the story, and it was just you that saw the story. So having the story told from different viewpoints from different people really is the only way to confirm oral histories. You can't always trust an oral history. You got to verify it from different points. So these 5 guys tell me about Charles Green, because Charles is actually listed as MIA, not KIA. So he's missing in action. He's one of 2. And at one point I'd mentioned in conversations with these guys, I always wondered what happened to the 2 MIAs. And they're like, well, I know what happened to Green. Like, what happened to Green? According to these 5 guys from different vantage points, Charles is down in his quarters with the mumps. He's feverish. And if you put yourself in his situation, he's right behind that. Those quarters are right behind that forward fire room where the plane hit. So feverish in his bunk, he's hearing the 5-inch guns firing. He's hearing from the black. He's hearing the 40 millimeters open fire over there, 20 millimeters. And then all of a sudden he hears our 40s real close kick in, and the 20s. And then all of a sudden this ripping of metal from the impact of the plane hitting the forward fire room. The ship's going to vibrate around him because it vibrated the aft fire room 2 compartments back. And he's right next door to the hit. He's going to hear the screech of the decompression of the boilers. He's going to hear the ripping of the hull, which is his hull because he's on the port side, his side of the hull. He's going to hear that rip open from the bomb coming out and the engine of the plane coming out. And then he's going to hear this just massive concussion, which shakes the ship, maybe knocked him out. This is all, just, I don't know that he was knocked out of his bunk, but it's a possibility. But he's going to hear all this noise, and he's going to hear the shrapnel hitting the hull. And it's puncturing up above. I don't remember if it punctured. It probably did, because it punctured into the mess deck down below, one level below him. So odds are shrapnel's coming in where he's at. And the possibility is very real. And then because the fire room is no longer feeding the engine room generators, the forward half of the ship is going dark. So he's going into the dark. He's probably thinking, oh my God, the ship is sinking. His natural reaction, get out, get to the main deck. Don't be inside if it takes you under. He goes up the ladder. He's trying to open the scuttle because the hatches are closed. And he can't lift that huge hatch. You and I have to have a counterweight to lift it. So he's opening the scuttle, the little round hatch inside the bigger hatch. He's having trouble lifting it. And he finally gets it lifted open. And this is where these guys' comments come into play. They said, looking down, you see the mess deck hatch, and you see the bodies of the damage control team scattered around it, laying around it. And you start seeing a couple of the bodies moving, and the hatch, the scuttle, finally moves enough to where they slide off to the side, and the hatch opens, and here comes Green trying to climb out. And he looks over, and he sees his chief. He sees Chief Hamilton laying there dead, and said his eyes just got wide. And he started screaming like a banshee, like the hounds of hell were coming behind him. And he comes out of that scuttle, and he races down the port side deck, and said he barely gets to the boat winch near midships, and he dives over the side of the ship, and said they never saw him come up. So Charles was listed MIA because there's no body on board. They can't find him. All of these guys' stories lined up from different vantage points. The same description. The scuttle's moving, the bodies are moving. He's coming out. His eyes are wide. He's screaming, dives off. And then what was really interesting to me about this story, every single one of them, not knowing that any of them had told this story. And when they say Green, and I've already heard the story once, I'm like, oh, really? Because each of them, the first one did this to me. He wagged his finger in front of me and said, don't you dare tell this story till we're all dead. Don't do it. And I'm like, why? This gives an answer to what happened to Green. And he's like, I don't want his family thinking he was a coward. He was sick. He was feverish. He didn't know what was going on. And that damn thing blew up right next to him. God knows what that did to him. And he sees all these dead bodies. What's going to go through a guy's mind? it was only natural for him to abandon ship, being in the condition he was in. I don't want anybody ever thinking this man's a coward, especially his family. So when, I kept my mouth shut, I did what I was told. And then the second guy comes up, and damned if the second guy didn't say the same thing. And the third guy, and the fourth guy, and the fifth guy.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting to me about this, there's camaraderie, there's shipmates, right? You expect that of shipmates. But each of these 5 guys were white. Charles was African American. And we know what race relations were like in the 40s, especially in the South. And Charles was from, I'm not sure, I don't have it here. But, walking down the street, these guys were not going to share a cab with this guy. They weren't going to share a bus seat. He's going to have to go to the back of the bus. They're not going to eat at the same counter with him, right? They might not even spit on him if they see him. But he's a shipmate. He died on their ship, and they didn't want anybody thinking badly of him. And they held on to this information, instead of reporting what happened to him, they held on to it because they didn't want him thinking, anybody knowing he dove over the side and think it was cowardice.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just phenomenal that they would do that. They finally told the story when they were getting late in life because they wanted somebody to know about what happened to him, but they didn't want anybody to think he was a coward. And to me, that's the epitome of the word shipmates, because you look out for each other. So Charles Green's story is very special to me. I tell this on our Twilight tours, and damned if I don't have somebody crying, just wiping tears after it's over. And they are like, this is phenomenal. I'm so glad you told this story.
Yeah.
So, for the first time in wide publication, that's the story of what happened to Charles Green. Solomon Thompson was our third African-American crew member, one of 10 children. Not a lot known about him. His sister told us that he dropped out of school in 1937. And she believed from 37 to 43, when he finally enlisted, that he played piano with a traveling little musical combo traveling around Mississippi. He was from McCool, Mississippi. This one is a sad one. William Wall was born on April 11th, 1927. He died on his 18th birthday on April 11th, 1927. And this is the really sad part. This is the only thing we know about him, other than he entered in 43, he went to this training, he ended up on KIDD on this date, he died on KIDD on this date. We know nothing about his life before the Navy. Felix D'Amico was a water tender, died in the forward fire room. Darvin Lee, I mentioned earlier, for the aft head, from Pawnee, Oklahoma. No less than, 5 kids born in 1945 were named Darvin after Darvin Lee in Pawnee, Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
I mentioned he was a colorful figure. His best friend from Pawnee, Oklahoma, left this information with his son. His name was Upshaw. And the son was named, one of the kids named Darvin. Said Darvin was about 6'3" and about 210 pounds and tough as nails. And when the recruits from Pawnee were gathering together to get on the bus to go to boot camp, Upshaw reports that Darvin came busting into the lobby of the Pawnee Hotel downtown on his horse. And he's riding around shooting his pistol on his horse. Just, I don't know if he's drunk or what, but he's having a good time and being raucous. And the sheriff was called, and Darvin accused the authorities to arrest him. Just come get me. And they brokered a settlement where they let him get on the bus instead of going to jail, and he could be on his way. And so he got on the bus instead of going to jail. No mention of whatever happened to the horse. I'm curious about the horse. His name's on a monument at the town square in Pawnee. Bernard Kostelnik left behind a wife. She did not only lose a husband at Okinawa, but she lost her brother at the Battle of Savo Island 2.5 years earlier. Bernard was one of the gun crew on the forward starboard 40 millimeter. And when they saw the plane was about to hit, they abandoned the gun. They're not going to stop it. They abandoned the gun and they ran a few feet around the deck house, and the bomb blast caught them with the shrapnel, and killed them. Only one survived. He stayed on the gun and he lived. The rest of them that fled died. George Krasinger was another member of that 40 millimeter crew. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of info on him. Charles Jenkins was also there, and he signed on underage, not as underage as the 14-year-olds, but he signed on with the signed consent of his father, who was a World War I vet. Morgan Andrew Payne was one of 4 brothers, 3 of whom were in the Navy in World War II, and he was a member of the port side 40 millimeter gun up forward, and he was the only one killed on the port side gun crew. The bulk of the gun kind of protected them from the bomb blast. John Miller was also a member of that port side crew, and I said Andy was the only one that was killed on that crew. John was on the crew, but he got off. Of course, nothing's happening on the port side.
Yeah.
He hears everything happening on the starboard side. He's like, I'm going to take a look, see what's going on. And he was last seen walking aft on the 01 level from the gun mount. And he's the other guy that's listed as missing in action. Nobody knows what happened to him. Nobody saw what happened when the bomb blast went off and what happened to John. He was not found on board. The theory is, and this is only a theory, the theory is that the bomb blast hit the ship and it picked him up and threw him against the bulkhead, and he just bounced like a rubber ball and bounced off the ship. That's just a theory. Nobody really knows what happened to him. Obviously, he died because nobody has seen him since.
Yeah.
Bernard Gutterman died at his battle station on the bridge, portside torpedo director. There is a picture of that torpedo director, and it's a big, hulking, heavy piece of metal, and it is bent over like a drooping tree. So you can imagine what he experienced. Eugene Gothrow was a signalman on the bridge, one of 10 children. His sister was a nurse in World War II. A brother served in the Navy, 2 more in the Army, one of which was killed at Normandy. Surviving brother, Gene, met him in Honolulu while Kidd was in port and was the last family member to see Gene alive. Bill Gath, who I mentioned earlier, the memory of the kid, he helped treat his wounds with sulfa powder. Gene was asking for a cigarette, and Bill found one for him, even though there's no smoking on board during general quarters. And Bill himself didn't smoke or have cigarettes, but he tracked cigarettes down for Gene. And he said Gene passed at 3 a.m. on April 12th. John Kanata was a signalman striker. If you don't know what a striker is, it's trying to change rates from one job to another. He was a friend of Gath. Milford Fawfall. I talk about Milford in my tours all the time. Milford, if you look on the picture frame, Milford has a baby face. He is so smooth and everything. He looks like he's 12 years old. If I remember correct, he was 20. And he was a signalman. He was also a friend of Gath. He was up on the bridge. He was wounded in his leg. It wasn't a life-threatening injury. He banged up his ankle. Had some bone sticking out, shrapnel. About 2 hours after the attack, the pharmacist mate was working on him. And one of his friends told me this story when they were visiting for a reunion. Said the pharmacist mate instructed him, hold him down by the shoulders. And apparently, I guess he had passed out or he was groggy or something. And said, don't let him sit up. And said, Milford opened his eyes, looked up, and was like, can I have a cigarette? Just like Gothrow. Can I have a cigarette? And this guy is telling me, he said, we were all like James Dean. He said, we all had these short sleeve shirts on and we got our cigarette pack, tucked up under the sleeve, rolled up under the sleeve to keep it there. And he said, I reached under and I got the cigarette pack and I'm tapping it. And I gave him a cigarette and he sat up as I let go of him and he sees his ankle and he goes, my ankle. And his eyes roll back in his head and he falls, hits the deck and he's gone. He went into shock and died. And that's what I use to talk about why there's red paint in the head where they work on these guys. Frederick Heaton was a fireman, died in the forward fire room, same as Clifford Kammerer, and same as Dennis Kornowski. George Gresshopper was our chief engineer. He played football in high school. He was known as a good chief. He always had everything prepped on time for them to leave, the boilers up to speed, knew how to blow the right type color of smoke, not too black, not too white. It couldn't be seen on the horizon. The guys talk about in the forward engine room with Chief Taylor, they all smuggle cans of of food. When they're restocking, all the chiefs
Yeah.
be lined up, and it's an all hands thing. Everybody is moving food except for the chiefs and the officers.
Yeah.
And when the chiefs see something that they really like, that they want to kind of pull off to the side, they're like, and this guy goes off and they stick it in a hidey hole. Amazing they didn't have rats, And the forward engine room crew had scarfed a can of Vienna sausages, and so they stick it up on the steam pipe so the heat bleeding
Yeah.
in the steam pipe will cook it.
There we
And
go.
right about that time, here comes Lieutenant Gresheimer to talk to not Chief Hamilton, Chief Taylor. And they're walking around the engine room, and then somebody goes, "Did you poke a hole in the can?" "No, I thought you were going to poke a hole in the can." "Oh, man, did you poke?" "No, idiot, you were supposed to poke a hole in the can." And they're all sweating now because that thing is going to just boom, blow up, right?
Yeah.
No pressure relief on it. And said finally they all breathed a sigh of relief. Here comes the lieutenant. He starts up the ladder. Chief is standing there, and he stops right halfway up the ladder, and he's right next to the can. And they're like, "Oh crap, does he see it?" And he turns and he looks down, and he's like, "By the way, Chief," kaboom! And Vienna sausages and sauce all over the place, and said it was all over his face, his uniform. And he just, with one hand holding the ladder and the other, he wipes his eyes out, and he wipes the sauce out of his nose
Oh
and
gosh.
mouth. And they're like, "Oh my God, we're gonna die." And said he's still hanging by one hand, and he just starts laughing, and he turned around and continued up the ladder. No repercussions. Said the hatch closes, and then Chief Taylor turns around. Oh my God. Chief Taylor let him have it. And Grasshopper, of course, he was the one that I talked about. He married at the same time as Abernathy. He was actually supposed to not be on the ship that day. He was supposed to have left 2 weeks earlier, but with all the destroyers taking hits around Okinawa, he felt that his assistant engineers, they were both kind of training to ramp up to become chief, and he felt that they needed a little bit more seasoning. He could give them a little bit more information. "I'm going to stick around for a couple of weeks and then head out." And so he wasn't even supposed to be on the ship. He's supposed to be back home or to wherever he was being transferred. And they had a gauge on a steam line that was sticky. And they called up and they said, "Lieutenant, we want to change this out in the forward fire room. And we want to make sure it's okay with you." And he said, "Hang on." He was really a hands-on type of guy. He said, "Hang on,
Yeah.
let me take a look at this, because we're at battle stations. I don't know if we should be doing this." And he went down, and the plane hit, and that's where he died. Clifford Heft was a farm boy from Pilot Rock, Oregon. Didn't care much for farm work, but his mom wrote us a letter years later, and she said, "I think in the 80s, I think he would have enjoyed farming now since it's become so mechanized." He was tearing cars apart and putting them back together all the time. He loved machinery and everything.
Yeah.
And he died in the forward fire room. Jimmy Carmody had a brother in the war in Europe, and his first cousin, Lois, told us that he had a secret girlfriend, and when he would come home on leave, he'd spend half his leave at home with the family, and he'd be telling, I got to go, I got to be back to the ship, and he'd spend the other half in Chicago with his girlfriend. He was from Massachusetts. And his mom was always worried that he'd get involved with a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. So he kept it secret from her. But his aunt and his cousin knew. And she said, "I was really depressed when he was leaving the last time in January of 45. And she said, he came out. I was sitting on the front step, and he came out, and he just put his arm around me. He was like, 'Don't worry, cuz your cousin's going to win this war for you.'" She said that was the last time I saw him. Said a few years after the war, his mom they were baking with her and her mom, and said her aunt looked up and just out of the blue said, "Do you guys think Jimmy had a girlfriend?" And said she looked at her mom, and her mom looked at her, and they're like, "No, ma'am, we don't think he did." Yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of feel that way too. I'm glad he didn't get hooked up with the wrong girl. So mom never knew about the girlfriend. No idea who the girlfriend was. Sylvester Hansen was the chief water tender in the forward fire room. He died there. He was nicknamed Swede. And his nieces have contacted us in recent years, and they'd find that story hilarious because he was actually Danish. Robert Francis Walker was the next to last photo we found. He attempted to re-enlist 3 separate times. So Marvel fans watching the MCU, he's Captain America. He's going from recruitment center to recruitment center, trying to get in underage, age 16, gets busted every time. He worked part-time at Universal Studios as a tour guide. Met his wife Marguerite at a Sadie Hawkins dance where the girls invite the guys. And after they got married, he worked at a Hudson plant building bombers for shipment to England. And it was his wife who signed for him to enter the Navy at age 17. His son Lawrence was born while he was away at boot camp, and he saw Lawrence for the first time Christmas holiday of 44. She took the baby to California, down to San Francisco, and met up with him, and he saw him, and he got on the ship, and that's the last time they saw him. So he never lived to see his son grow up. He only saw him the one time, and Lawrence doesn't remember his dad, but he has come out several times. Charles Allwhite was also in the fire room. He died. He was one of 2 shipmates that actually made it home. He died. He was buried. He was the last one found down in the wreckage at the very bottom of the fire room, and he was buried at Ulithi Atoll. And then after the war, he was reinterred in Arkansas near where his sister lived. Jack Walsh was a water tender, died in the forward fire room. He was also buried at sea on April 15th, but his body washed ashore, and I say April 15th, that's a misprint, on April 12th. His body washed ashore at Ulithi, and he was buried there. And again, his parents had him brought home to be buried in Ohio. We got his photograph in an interesting way. It wasn't from the military. His girlfriend, by the name of Sue, had his picture, and she kept it on the piano. She played piano, and she kept a fresh rose beside the picture, and she would always play piano and look at Jack's picture. And she said she got married, and when she got pregnant with her first child and the child was born, then she put his picture and the rose away. And that's where we got his photograph from. Dorsey Bridgewater, Kentucky, there's a memorial dedicated to him at the courthouse there. Lawrence Bynog is the only crew member that died. That's from Louisiana. He's from a little place called Lena Station, not far north of where I grew up. Was engaged and married. I went to school with some of his, I never knew it, but went to school with some of his relatives. And my first cousin ended up marrying the step granddaughter of his brother, John. Yeah. Louis Higginbotham left behind a wife and a daughter. Bob Berwick, I mentioned, the other officer who died on the bridge. He was best friends with Bill Barnhouse, and we've just mentioned mustaches with Chief Hamilton. Bill grew a mustache, and Bob Berwick teased him endlessly about how horrible it looked. He wrote privately to Barnhouse's wife and Margaret and said, please convince him to shave this thing off. It's horrible, Margaret. Get him to get rid of it. He was from Iowa. He was an only child. He went home during that break, December, January, 44, 45. And he meant to get married, but he ran out of time. He got back to San Francisco. He convinced a minister to marry them over the phone. Barnhouse's wife was there visiting while the ship was in the shipyard. He and her were going to be witnesses to the ceremony. But back then, if anybody's watched Andy Griffith, if you remember the old switchboards with the plugs and everything, and they never got a clear line to Iowa to do the marriage ceremony. So he died without being able to get married. We've got some heartbreaking letters from his mother writing to Commander Moore, asking about Bob's last moments and everything. And it just, you read it and it just breaks your heart. Gold Star families. That's one of the things about Memorial Day here that we try to emphasize is it's not Happy Memorial Day. It is a very somber experience. And it's because of the loss of guys like these and what the family members go through every time that anniversary rolls around. So that is what we know about our 38 crew members. And that's not all of the 38. That's just the ones that we've got stories on.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's awesome. It's amazing we can even find the information that we have about it, especially when, growing up in the Depression era, 30s era, not a whole lot of information. Record keeping and stuff like that we know today is not a thing back then. So,
and that generation doesn't talk about it. The nieces
Yeah.
of some of these guys, they come to us to learn about their relatives who died on the KIDD, because the brothers and sisters and the grandparents, none of them would talk about it. It's just like you don't talk about the dead. You don't bring it
Yeah.
up. It's too painful. And so
Yeah.
a lot of them come to us now. So it's I'm kind of pleased that we actually are able to pass that information on. And as far as last words, I'm so excited to make this video because I talk to you all the time about, if I get hit by a bus, this is where this is how this
Yeah.
happened. For the longest time, we have not had generational transfer. I'm a strong believer in generational transfer of information. And a lot of this has been in my head, coming from Richard Hammond, coming from the shipmates themselves, the survivors. And I'm happy to get this story. I'm happy to get these guys' personal lives, personal information, Yaguchi's information. I'm so thrilled to be able to get it out, because if there's a fire, all this stuff goes away. If there's a disaster, if the ship sinks, it's all gone. And if something happened to me, all of this stuff here is gone. But now it's out on the internet. It'll be in multiple forms of media and multiple locations, and these guys will live on forever. And so I really appreciate you spending time with me tonight, recording this so that we can tell their stories in perpetuity. So thank you.
No. Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's a good thing that we do this keynote series to talk about, again, like we stated in the beginning. It's educational opportunities for the community, get the community involved, and to know what the USS KIDD Veterans Museum is about. It's these stories, it's these guys. So, but other than that, I guess we'll wrap up, and I'll just give out some information. You can find us on YouTube, USS KIDD Veterans Museum. Do state that, because then you'll find some World of Warship gameplay. Our Facebook and Instagram, we also have posts there under USS KIDD Veterans Museum. So absolutely go check us out. And the best thing you could do is actually come visit us. We're open every day, 9:30 to 3:30. It's our last ticket sale. Again, it's one thing to hear us talk about it, one thing to read about it in a book. It's one thing to come out and actually experience it. So
stand where these stories happened.
Exactly. All right. Well, on that, thank you all very much. It's been great, and we'll look forward to our next keynote series coming out shortly.
Thank you, Elijah.
Thank you.